and the scrutiny process. The select role is to scrutinise decisions and in advance of the Cabinet making decisions. This committee cannot make decisions, but it can debate them, and following the scrutiny the committee undertakes today. It can offer recommendations to the Cabinet. The scrutiny process enables elected members who are not part of the executive to provide constructive and apolitical challenge. In ordinary circumstances, we would hold a meeting at our headquarters here in USC HQ. We would welcome the public to attend our meetings and speak in our public open forum. Unfortunately, the global pandemic has prevented us from meeting in person. The Council's values are to ensure the openness and transparency we've led the way in live streaming electronic meetings. However, the limitations of technology, as you've seen this morning, make holding an online public open forum difficult. The committee has always valued public contributions to scrutiny activity because the scrutiny provides a mechanism through which those affected by proposals are able to make their views known to us. So whilst we are unable to fully support public participation in this meeting, we have sought to include the public voice through inviting residents to share their thoughts on the proposals being discussed by sending a written contribution and video or an audio file. All of the evidence we received about today's meeting made available to committee members ahead of the meeting. We will reflect as many of these contributions as possible in today's meeting. We have 2 reports to consider. We will allocate 30 minutes to the public open forum for each item, and as part of the public open forum we will hear from us Town Council who would like to share the views of residents who have contacted them. Given that us Town Council will be reflecting the views of many individuals, we have enabled them to speak at this meeting for 10 minutes to present those views and to outline any specific questions they would like to ask officers and to address their presentations of the report. I would now like to begin the meeting by asking Hazel to advise us of who is present at today's meeting.
Chair, there's quite a long list of people, so I don't propose we go through, but I'll make a note for the purpose of the minutes.
Thank you. So we'll go to item 1, apologies of absence. Hazel, have we had any apologies for today's meeting?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 2, declarations of interest. Should we just do as and when? Councillor Eason, are you wanting to speak or do you want to turn your video off?
All I'm saying is I've just arrived at the meeting. Sorry I was late, I was taking a phone call, but I'll switch everything off now then, okay? Okay,
thank you. So we'll move to item 3 with the public open forum. The first being on the future provisions of household waste and recycling centres report. Should I hand over to you, Carl? Or should we go straight to the public forum, sorry? Please give us a moment while we're trying to play the videos.
As of today, the 22nd of September, USC Recycling Group have received nearly 2,000 electronic responses and nearly 500 written responses regarding the proposed closure of USC Recycling Centre. These are extracts from some of the letters received.
Creating accessibility issues will result in an increase in unsightly fly tipping crimes. This can be evidenced by reports of fly tipping in rural communities having soared by 300% during the COVID-19 lockdown, with tip closures blamed for contributing to the rise.
We have only been resident in the town since 2012, and in that relatively short space of time have seen council tax increases of 42%. This outrageous increase has been accompanied by drastic cuts to recycling facilities. My wife and I are now in our 80s and desolate with the thought of having to travel long distances to dispose of our waste.
Your listing of the supposed positives which outweigh the negatives is not convincing. The huge negative of non-driving elderly people unable to dispose of household items is paramount. Many people choose to live in Usk because of its self-sustaining town with all the necessary amenities. Driving can be avoided. You are now removing one of these amenities from a vulnerable group.
My husband and I are 94 and 86. There are many people of a similar age in Usk for whom a trip to Landfoist constitutes a major effort. A round trip from Usk to Landfoist of approximately 26 miles would create more pollution. This is a time when global warming has become a major issue and when every citizen has to take responsibility for not creating excessive pollution.
I consider the centre a real asset, especially for people like us who don't have a garage and only a small rear yard. So it was very convenient to walk to the skip and sort our rubbish into the relevant containers. We used it frequently, so never had a heavy bag to carry up. My husband is in his 80s and I'm catching up.
Monmouthshire County Council has itself pledged to move towards a green future. To have to drive to a recycling site some miles away in order to be recycling conscious is patently ridiculous.
The closure of the recycling facility will also serve to cause an increase in lengthy motor transport journeys across Monmouthshire, as residents will transport their waste to the sites at Landfoist, 5 Lanes on Mitchell Troy. This in turn will increase harmful air pollutants in the local environment and adversely impact upon MCC's local air quality management obligations and the Clean Air Plan for Wales. I have lived in Usk for 59 years and now as a non-driving elderly resident of Usk, I often took items to the recycling facility in my trolley.
The increased risk of fly tipping and air pollution serves to highlight the damaging impact this decision could have upon the wider Monmouthshire community. However, governments believe that all environmental decisions of the here and now are being made on behalf of the generations of the future to come. So therefore, worst of all is the message this decision would send that Monmouthshire County Council chose to save their budget rather than their future generation.
Hello, yes, good afternoon. We are Anne and Andrew Morton from Langibby concerning the situation with recycling with regard to Monmouth County Council, and this is our video response. First of all, the letter which was sent by the Usk Town Council, authored by Chris Wilkinson to the council, we are broadly in agreement with. In particular, we would say the 20-mile round trip that people would have to take and have to take now currently, now that the Usk facility is closed, which of course contributes to pollution and all sorts of other things. That's the first point. The second point, I think, Anne, you've got about the...
Yeah, I had some problems with the online survey. Question 3 I found very difficult to answer because in the preamble to the question, it was comparing 1 bag per household weekly collection with 1 bin per household fortnightly collection. Well, for those of us, and that's most of us that I can see around here, we have multiple bags collected every week. And so actually the comparison is that your waste collection, your green waste collection, would be reduced by about 50%, if not more, depending on how many bags you have. I mean, I think we're quite prepared to pay to help keep the service going, to help keep Monmouthshire green, which is what we all want. If this service disappears, we will have to make extra trips to Abergavenny or Caldecott. Yeah. And if we do that, that is loads of extra trips. We almost always are filling up all 4 bags. We have a biggish garden and we do have our own compost heaps, but those are overflowing and we need the extra bags to put all our stuff in. Perhaps we shouldn't be such keen gardeners, but you know, hey,
it's actually the stuff that doesn't compost particularly well. I mean,
yeah,
in terms of trees and what have you.
Yeah, where you need a bigger compost heap with higher temperatures and pernicious weeds and that sort of thing.
And pernicious weeds in particular,
yeah,
which of course we can't compost. So there is a case to be made, very definitely, for a facility in Usk, and one which will take the capacity. What was the last thing we were going to say about that?
Well, I think we're about there now. I think the main thing is we want to support you in your attempt to make this a green county.
Yes.
And we think that reducing the green waste collection will do anything but. Well,
exactly, and also reducing the number of recycling facilities will only add to further pollution and journeys by car, yeah. Which of course we're all trying to avoid at all possible. It's counterintuitive and counterproductive. So we would ask the council to think very, very carefully about what they're going to do with regards to the recycling, particularly in this area, in Usk and in the Usk environs.
That's okay,
I think that's it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you everyone for your submission.
Thank you, Chair. I thought one of Alison from us. Well, I think we're going to take Alison.
Okay, sorry. Is Alison on? Through Matthew Gatehouse. Alison, are you ready to speak?
Hello there. Yeah. I'm just going to take my mask off when Matthew steps aside. Is that okay, Matt? Hello, Chair and committee. There's a lot to absorb in the report that we've been given by Carl, which we've looked through in quite short order, really. Because of the time limits, I'll only be able to focus on a couple of things. But firstly, let me touch on cost, which is always a thought, isn't it? A determining factor. The cost saving to closing Usk, okay, Matt, is 40,000. We don't accept that that's a reason for closure. Usk and its surroundings have close to 1,900 dwellings at an average council tax of £2,000 for a 3-bedroom property. Then that 40,000 is paid for by council tax payments on just 20 dwellings. It's 20 out of 1,900. The cost of the works that are classed as essential is 30,000. Again, that can be carried by 15 dwellings. One point that Carl has made is that the performance in Usk and Mitchell Troy are dragging down the recycling proportions and therefore affecting performance against Welsh Assembly targets. It's not a case this year because in an unexpected turn, the pandemic has actually improved recycling rates. 2021 is quoted as achieving the highest recycling rate in Monmouthshire. Therefore, of 74%, sorry. Therefore, if Usk were left open and given the opportunity to be supported as other centres have with education and booking systems, etc., we do have the time to make an improvement. The procurement process is due to end in September 2021. It doesn't need to be delayed as procurement can be requested with 2 alternate scenarios. We don't need to make the decision to close Usk now. There are some cost figures in the report in terms of comparison with Mitchell, Troy and Usk that I cannot follow. But in any event, these are historic figures. We are now in a new time that we never expected to be in with the pandemic. That's brought about changes which not only affect recycling figures for the county, but also for Usk. We want the opportunity in Usk to show the benefit to recycling figures made from those behavioural changes that have been imposed and consolidated within pandemic time. Work will be needed, it is said, to improve USC at a cost of around 30,000, but large amounts have already been spent on works over the last few years to safeguard the future of the facility. We don't want that money thrown away. It was an investment. There are always investments to be made to maintain a service. To contrast with this, we've quoted about over £1.5 million to upgrade Mitchell Troy to improve the facility. One comment has been made that USC can't reopen because of social distancing. Well, there are 2 operatives on site. We've been told that it isn't suitable for disabled people, but those 2 operatives could help people use the facility, and all of that can be managed with social distancing in the same way as we're managing to walk down streets, with a bit of navigation and willingness. There's a theme that we really object to, that USC is the poorest performing HWRC in the county and that USC will not improve, but we challenge this. One of the figures on table 1 of page 4 of the report shows USC performing at a recycling versus residual waste rate of 47.92%, the closest otherwise being Mitchell Troy. These are the figures for 2018-19. It notes the obvious challenge that smaller facilities do not recycle the complete range offered in the larger facilities. Carl has given me a list of the items recycled elsewhere. There are bulk items, there are white goods, there is rubble. And if you, statistics only have value if you are comparing like for like. USC figures should only be compared with other sites with those additional recycling items removed from the calculation, as otherwise the 0 measurement given for USC is interpreted as USC's failure to recycle it rather than it having no opportunity to recycle it. In other words, the weight of rubble and plasterboard, etc., recyclable at other sites is tipping the scales against USC. It should not be the case of a lack of a facility is used to demonstrate poor performance. The Eumonia, if I say it right, report does give measurements to each head, and excluding just rubble and plasterboard from the equation brings Mitchell Troy to a 48.52% recycling residual, which is the same as USC, and reduces recycle percentages at the 2 larger tips between 8 and 10%, so a closer comparison with USC. There's been a comment made that food waste was seen as higher at USC, but it has been accepted that that was based on infrequent sampling and may not be representative. The sample was too small and could have been provided by commercial use and not residents. USC has great recycling overall. There's facilities at the hub and the fire station which are in use and so not included in the count. We now have a new high street food shop for 0 waste and refillables. Good behaviours throughout the town impact negatively on recycling tonnages, but they are the right thing to do. That should not put us at a disadvantage of comparison proportions on residual waste. It's said that figures have improved startlingly across the county because of the COVID lockdown, necessitating improved curbside figures and the benefits of booking systems. But an assumption has been made that USC would not similarly benefit if reopened, and we do not understand that. Time and time again, statements are made that USC will not improve, that USC will be the lowest performing recycling centre in Wales. It's stated as a fact, but it is only an opinion. There are successes specified in the rest of the report attributable to re-educating or changed behaviours during COVID, improvements made through curbside recycling as a result of the booking system, and these successes have been denied to USC as USC has not been allowed to reopen. It is not far different from the other 3 sites. If you look at the tables based on the consumer survey, the residual waste and items that could have been collected curbside all account to broadly 65% of the total across all 4 sites. USC can improve as others have improved. It is said then that USC will not improve enough. Again, we challenge this. Carl's recent experience is that improvements are made with education, with the booking system, and we have a motivated team now with our SURF group to effect change. And indeed, we have an obligation to future generations to effect change. Officers and members of MCC have confirmed to us Town Council that COVID will not be used as a device to close the recycling facility in Usk. And yet by not allowing the facility to reopen, that is what is happening. Closure has been held in abeyance for further consultation on the wider HWRC provision and for additional compositional analysis of waste streams. That has not happened due to COVID and the lockdown closure of Usk continuing. The county-wide consultation was not what was expected by Town Council members following meetings with MCC. What was expected was an Usk-based survey. The consultation that you did had only 959 responses. It ran mid-March to mid-April when everywhere was reeling with the effect of lockdown and pandemic. Now that we have mobilised with the Town Council and with the Save Usk Recycling Facility Group, SURF, we could get a better, more targeted response and use that opportunity to educate people as to what can be recycled and what improvements use of curbside will make. 75% of people who responded did not want closures. Consultation gave a perception only, but that perception was similar across all 4 recycling centres, that 65% of waste on all of the sites encompassed material that could be collected at curbside. Usk was no worse. A far larger number responded to our petition and contact with SURF. Please do not ignore those residents. Close to 2,000 people responded to the petition. There are over 540 personal letters supporting retaining the facility. More are arriving, all in a very short time scale. There's a feeling demonstrated in Christine Wilkinson's report that Usk is a repeated target for removal of services. Let us make a case together for retention of that facility. The report was ambiguous on this point, but let me be clear that the overwhelming response from the town and surroundings is that this facility should remain, and the SURF Action Group is absolutely committed to saving the facility. MCC had the time, because of the COVID increase in recycling and because of the delay in procurement, to allow time for SURF and the Town Council to carry out targeted consultation and make improvements. We ask that MCC give Usk the deferral that was previously agreed to allow time outside lockdown for proper based consultation and with the facility open. Otherwise, COVID has deprived us of the chance to show change. MCC have the ability to retain a much valued facility in the heartland of Monmouthshire, which promotes recycling at a level where everybody can appreciate and understand where daily actions matter and make a difference. And yet MCC are minded to close it without giving us the same opportunities as elsewhere in the county, and to allow us time for the complete change in life that COVID has brought upon us to work through to advantage. Those positive behavioural changes experienced elsewhere could help here too. Carl quotes, there's been a massive reduction in the number of visitors with the booking system now in place compared to 2019, with increased recycling at the curbside. There's absolutely nothing to say that this would not also be the case in Usk. There's a number of other smaller points, but the report seems to have picked on the negative, but I want to spin it and give a bit of a positive as well. We dispute that people will get frustrated for not being able to recycle everything in Usk. It's just a question of knowing what is permitted. If the system is clear, requiring bookings, then learned behaviour will take over so that people know where to take their waste. That Usk does not recycle rubble and white goods is not a reason for all of the other good recycling facilities to be taken away. A clear message that Usk does not recycle these items and booking will be required in another centre is all that's required to minimise disruption. Mention is made of 18 parking spaces removed from the car park because of the new access arrangements. That figure is disputed by the Town Council, as alternative spaces were then made available. Nothing is said of the impact on the high street of another facility in Usk being removed. Usk has been a hub town for the rural areas around. Time again, facilities are being eroded within the town that act as a draw to visits to the town and ripple out to the benefit of higher footfall on the street. Once these facilities are gone, you've outlined in your report how difficult it is to recreate them with planning and licenses, etc. MCC deserves to retain this important service, and residents deserve the chance to show lasting changes can be made here in Usk for the benefit of us all. Ease of use is seen as a bad thing in the report. That Usk visits the recycling facility more frequent is seen as a bad thing, but neither are bad. Both are easily controlled, if problematic, through the new booking system. There are not reasons to support closure when booking systems are in use elsewhere and manages bookings effectively. Unchallenged use is seen as a bad thing. Broadly, we agree. Carl will have heard that the overwhelming experience in Usk is that permits are never requested, nor the use of the residual skip queried or challenged. The report quotes statistics that cross-border waste was a problem until resident permits were introduced. If there's no inspection of permits, then there are no controls on cross-border waste in Usk. Newport County is only 15 minutes away, which is less than Usk residents would be required to travel if closure occurs. Waste tourism is just as easy in Usk as it is in Abergavenny. Examples are drawn that other local authorities provide only 1 or 2 facilities across the counties, but those quoted are built-up areas such as Cardiff. MCC is a rural county. Different considerations apply to rural counties if we are to minimise the impact of unnecessary journeys on a carbon footprint. Let us consider smaller, more local recycling centres being a success rather than conforming to the minimum statutory requirement or what is provided in a city or smaller geographical area. There is a place for local recycling, and please do not forget Usk is a town with an older population. Not everyone has a car. Fly tipping is a concern. It's expensive to clear. None of us forget in the post-COVID, none of us know in the post-COVID period what we can say the loss of a facility will do to fly tipping. What we want to do is to emphasise curbside collection is the most environmentally friendly way to manage household recycling and waste, and also reinforce MCC's comment that curbside collection for black bag and residual waste, that not using curbside collection for black bag and residual waste is not acceptable. Emphasise this is a valued recycling facility, not a dump, and that disposal of black bags of mixed waste undermine the efforts of the vast majority who recycle effectively. We need to make people aware of Welsh Government penalties. Nobody wants MCC to pay those. We note that black bag sorting is seen as desirable. We'd like to work together to see how we can achieve this in Usk to capture additional recyclate. What we'd like the council to do is check permits to stop cross-border use, stop commercial waste, support us with education and booking systems, and then the same as everybody else. You know, review cost-saving measures such as shorter hours through winter and on weekends, allow the savings of the implemented reduced days, because we've already had a reduction in Usk, to work through to have an impact on costs. And finally, not let COVID be the reason we are closed, because doing nothing was the option. Work with us positively to reopen and give us time to make a change. I'm sorry, I've said a lot in a very short time, so I hope you kind of got the gist of it. But we say that closure now after a continuing lockdown does not enable us to have the period of deferral that was promised. And it is entirely possible, indeed probable, that the benefits seen in the rest of the county and positive behaviour change will also apply to Usk. Strong turnaround in recycling across the county due to a strong campaign of recycling messages and COVID closures should be allowed to benefit us. Please work with us in the same way that you are working with other facilities to improve the recycling rates. Please recommend that Usk is reopened so that we can work together and have that period of deferral and consultation. And please support this town, which is at the centre of Monmouthshire. Thank you. Happy to take any questions and take a breather. I understand that the order has changed slightly, and instead of asking questions of Carl after Carl has presented his report, I'm now to ask questions before I've heard what Carl has to say. So I've scribbled down a couple, but in the meantime, I'm happy to take questions from the committee.
Do you want to go ahead and take the, if you've got these questions there, Alison?
I've scribbled some down whilst the videos were playing.
Okay, if you'd like to ask them now.
Okay, really one for Carl. You know, Carl, what do you say to residents who are going to be deprived of this facility if the closure is recommended?
If you read them out one after the other, then Carl will come in. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay. Would you accept that improvements in behaviour that have been seen elsewhere in the county will also apply to Usk? I think I've answered my own questions in effect in my submission, so I'll leave you with those two.
Okay, thank you, Alison, for your efforts in reflecting these contributions from the residents, so that we can consider them in our scrutiny and for attending the public. So we consider them in our scrutiny and attending the public open forum. I'll now move on to the presentation by Carl, and he'll also answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all in attendance. I'm going to run through the recommendations first, then I'll come back and answer the specific questions from Alison and from Usk Town Council, and relay some of the messages that came out of the letters that Usk Town Council passed on to me last week. So the report for the future of household waste recycling centres sets out 4 recommendations and includes the closure of Usk. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read the report and all the appendices. So recommendation 1 is to continue with the booking system. I'm sure you're all aware. I just turned my camera on, sorry. I'm sure you did want to see me, but yeah, here I am. So the recommendation 1 is to continue with the booking system. I'm sure you're all aware the sites were closed March 23rd in response to the COVID restrictions. The closures of the sites was universal across Wales and the bulk of the UK in the same week. As well as closing the sites, we prioritised our collection services to give us the best chance for the residents and for us to continue services as normal as possible. So between March and the reopening of the sites towards the end of May, the 22 authorities in Wales worked closely with Welsh Government to look at how we could reopen the sites safely. So that work was done. As we were coming up towards our planned opening date, many of the English authorities opened their sites. Manchester being one that sticks in my mind, 4-hour queues for sites. So obviously then we were quite concerned. We can't have 4-hour queues, so the booking system was introduced. It was done quite quickly and pulled together from a different form. It is slightly clunky, the booking system, but it does work very well. And at the moment we've had over 20,000 bookings through the system, of which 80% are self-servicing. So that's showing the level of people that are using the sites at the moment. And as I said, the booking system's now been running for 3 months. At the larger sites, it started with 30 slots per 30 minutes. This was based on the queuing capacity, so we could hold 30 cars in a queue without them spilling out onto the main roads at both Landfoist and 5 lanes. The smaller sites of Usk and Mitchell Troy, that's an impossibility. They're either out into the car park in Usk or out onto the main Mitchell Troy Road in Monmouth. So we didn't have that capacity to reopen the smaller sites at that time. And the measures were brought in to manage social distancing. We are still in a pandemic. As we see other neighbouring authorities re-enter lockdown, it should be plain to everybody that we are still deeply in that pandemic, and Monmouthshire is just as at risk as the other authorities around us as well. So the plan is to keep the booking system running now, while the recommendation is that we take the booking system and run it for the rest of the year, for the forever going forward. The booking system has really helped with peaks and troughs on site. It's easier to manage staff. It's easier to manage the social distancing element. We don't know how long COVID's going to last, but even coming out of COVID, we've seen a huge amount of benefits of the booking system, particularly around cars queuing. The maximum people are queuing now at the Landfoist and 5-lane sites around 15 minutes, where it was upwards of an hour queuing beforehand. So we can see some real benefits with this. If the recommendations go through as is and the booking system is introduced fully, we'll work with the neighbouring authorities to make the booking form better. It's clunky for all of us. It was brought in as a rush for all of us. But as we're all using it, there's benefit to us all. Invest in a small amount and working with Abivus to improve that interface for the public, and hopefully get the 80% up, that the self-servicing up to closer to 90% or even 100%. So that's recommendation 1. I'm going to work through the recommendations now, and as I said, and then I'll take questions and try and answer as many questions as I can on all of these points. So recommendation 2 was to close the USC facility. December last year, a cabinet report into rationalisation of the HWRCs, including the closure of USC, black bag sorting on sites and reviewing of the opening hours, was agreed. The report and recommendations were in response to concerns about achieving Welsh Government targets, and at that time we were looking at potential fines of just over £100,000. So those are substantial fines. They made us look at all of the data that we've got on sites, all of the data coming in from our collections, and reviewed what areas we could really work in to improve our recycling facilities. So that report then went to it set out the reasons for the closure of USC, which haven't changed. From an officer recommendation perspective, we are still working pre-COVID on the data that was collected then. So USC has a very low recycling rate. It is the worst performing site in Wales. I understand what, I'm not going to try and answer Alison's questions, but I understand what Alison was saying on the site and its ability. I have never said that USC residents are not good recyclers. What I've said is the site is not a good recycling centre. There is not enough facilities there to recycle everything that needs to be recycled in a modern facility. So that's the problem with USC. The site is too small. There's no room for expansion. It's at the rear of a busy car park. We've got genuine health and safety concerns over the use of the metal stairways and gantries. There's lighting issues on site that have affected the wider car park. There's concerns raised through the Eunomia report over drainage and potential work on a new interceptor system. There's surfacing issues in the car park area within the site itself as well that need to be addressed. Those costs come to roughly £30,000 for the interceptor, the drainage works, the lighting and the surfacing. So that would be a £30,000 unbudgeted cost if we kept USC open. The other point, obvious point, at a time with budget pressures where they are, there is a £40,000 saving if we close USC on staffing costs alone. There's some other incidental costs that we would save money on, but we agreed with Viridor that we would just take savings on the savings of the staff. So that works out to be £40,000 in year budget saving. We are retendering the service this year, ready for next year. Any reductions in service, we'll see a reduction in tendered prices accordingly. What those savings are, I don't know at this point because we haven't gone through the tender process. You can, in the tender process, put more than one option in, but it does get very, very difficult from a procurement perspective then, and the risk of challenge for having more than one option in there is quite difficult depending on what option you went with, because you'd have to compare all of the options to get a better one, and that may not be the same across the board for all the bidders. One of the other reasons for recommending the closure of USC is USC has roughly 5% of the population that it serves, the site serves. It creates just over 6% of the waste in Usk, so there's a greater amount of waste generated than the population, and then we've got 17% of the staffing costs for running the HWRCs are spent in Usk. So it's disproportional in our budget and disproportional in the amount of waste that it collects. All of these reasons are set out in this current report as well. The recycling rate at Usk is less than 50%. The vast majority of the waste going into Usk is black bags, and they contain a high percentage of recyclables that could be collected at the curbside. So the black bag composition is similar to the composition going into the other sites, as Alison said. The difference is the volume of black bags going into Usk is considerably greater than the volume of black bags going into the other sites. So there is more of that material coming into Usk in black bags. This is partly due to the closeness, the easy access of the site. Is used as a black bag disposal point. It's quicker to take a black bag down there than it is to wait for the 2-week collection that we provide. So that's what a lot of people do. A lot of the letters, a lot of the responses to our survey point to that they see it as an easy place to get rid of rubbish. A lot of people say that they take their recycling there as well, but that is not backed up by the data that we see on site with considerably higher volumes of rubbish going into the site. The decision to close Usk was put into abeyance to carry out the wider consultation on a proposal and additional compositional analysis. That work was done. The consultation did go out. It was a wider consultation. It included everybody. The proposals do not just affect Usk, they affect all of the county, so it's important that we capture everybody's views on this. At the time, the consultation was also at the same time Usk Town Council was supporting a change.org petition that Alison has talked about. There were over 1,000 residents had signed that petition at that point, so we believed, and the consultation was put up on that petition page, and there was a request for people to fill it in through that petition. I would have hoped that through a petition like that, I would get more people responding from Usk. As it was, 959 people responded to the survey that we put out, and I think it was roughly 180 were from Usk or using Usk facility. Some of the things that came through the survey that kind of backed up some of the data that we already had was that Usk facility is used too often. That sounds a strange thing to say, but people are using it too much. They are relying on it too much to get rid of black bag waste. 17% of the residents visited the site more than once a week, compared to less than 1.5% in 5 lanes. 37% visited weekly, compared to 5% in 5 lanes. Only 14% occasionally visited Usk, compared to 49% in 5 lanes. So in statistic terms, this means 71% of all visitors to Usk are there every week. 5 lanes has the highest recycling rate out of all of our sites. That is in complete contrast to the amount of people that use the site regularly. So the less people use the site, the more likely they are to recycle when they are there. That's the data is backed up by the evidence that came through from the survey. Survey also highlighted residents. What was important to residents was helpful staff, a wide range of recycling options, and the distance to travel. There was a range of comments on helpfulness of staff, some very positive, some very negative. In general, I think the positive won out. Usk has the most limited range of options for recycling, and this adds to the poor performance on site. We know that. It is not my view on it. It is actually backed up with data. Usk has the lowest recycling rate. That is backed with data across Wales, so we know that. Distance of travel, was very high on the list. It was in the top 3 for the residents of Usk and for the greater population. But distance of travel is around perception. People in Chepstow also said that the distance they have to travel to a site is important to them. They travel 7 miles. People in Lantony and Langewer and Grosmont said that distance that they have to travel to the site is also important to them. They travel 14 miles to a site. So it is about perception rather than pure distance within that report. If we were to close Esk residents would either have to travel 10 miles to Llanfoist or 10 miles to 5 lanes. It's equidistant between the two sites, so it's a 10-mile journey with that material. Lots of residents in Monmouthshire are travelling greater distances than that already. Chepstow is a much bigger town and is currently 7 miles from their nearest facility, so they make that journey whenever they want to use the facility. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the Usk Town Council letters of support and the Save Usk recycling facility comments as well. I'm going to try and answer some of them as we go through. What is important to note is that the 2,000 signatures on the change.org petition is change.org petition. For those who don't know, it's a global petitioning platform. You take petitions and they send it globally. I counted up the petitions last week. I think there was over 1,900 at that point last week. It's now, I think it's just gone over 2,000 now. 1,448 of them were not from Monmouthshire. So there was a lot of residents from Kuala Lumpur, Hong Kong Central, America, Iceland, to name but a few that have also signed that petition. That is the idea of these, they are global petitions, so it's not all Monmouthshire residents. Of the Monmouthshire residents, at that point, it was just over 500, and not all of them are Usk residents. They are a good base across Monmouthshire that signed that petition. Obviously, for everyone, whatever changes we make in waste, regardless of what those changes are, there are concerns about fly tipping. So I covered fly tipping within the report as well, but just to reiterate now, we shouldn't be excusing people who fly tip. There should be no excuse for it. We don't condone it at all. The closure of a site shouldn't allow people to fly tip. We have to move away from this language of it's okay to fly tip if you have to travel to a site. It's not okay to fly tip. It's not okay to fly tip in Chepstow because they've got to travel 7 miles. It's not okay to fly tip in Crickhowell because they travel 14 miles. It's not okay to fly tip in Lantony or Langewer because they travel 14 miles. We have to move away from that, giving people a reason or an excuse to fly tip. It's not allowed. It shouldn't be done. It's not good. So we need to tackle that attitude currently out there, and that's the level of conversation in the papers and in social media that fly tipping is allowable if the council then providing a service. It's not allowable in any sense. Over the last 5 months, we've seen an increase in fly tipping of 50 fly tips. I think it's 52 altogether, additional fly tipping incidents over the first 5 months of lockdown. That equates to 10 additional fly tips per month, or 2 per main town catchment area. So they are relatively small numbers when you look at it like that. We were already dealing with 480 incidences of fly tipping in the same period last year. We went through a big restructure in waste and street services and focused our Environmental Protection Act teams that deal with fly tipping and litter, and included more capacity within those teams to deal with fly tipping. It was already an issue for Monmouthshire when all the sites were open. It will continue to be an issue for Monmouthshire when all the sites are open. We need to deal with it properly and stop giving people excuses to do it. So that was the reasons for the closure of Usk. That's what the report set out. And I know I've answered a few of the questions as well, but it is important to recognise that within that report, we did look at a wider range of options. There is a full appraisal within the report as well regarding Usk and for the other recommendations. Recommendation 3 is to introduce revised opening of hours of 8 till 4 per day. Originally, the change of hours was to reduce costs. We're tasked with reducing costs across all the services in Monmouthshire. this was one of the solutions to reduce those costs. The survey specifically asked residents about reduced hours on weekends and through the winter to 4 o'clock, and were unanimously supported within the survey, which was really good for us. No one can see any sense to having a site open at 6 o'clock when it's tipping down with rain in the dark at Christmas time through December. We all agree with that. It makes sense to make those closures of that time. COVID has given us a new lens to look through. We've got more data on site usage now than we've ever had in the past, much more data of when people are using the sites. We now know that we've got huge capacity on the site through the booking system, so closing earlier is not a problem in getting people through the site. We've been closing the site at 5 o'clock since they've reopened. We haven't had a single request for the site to be open beyond 5 o'clock. So we've now revised what we are recommending, and we are saying that the site should close at 4 o'clock all the time. The reduction in residents using the sites, last June, 1,500 visitors per day were entering the site, is closer to 420 this June. So we know that with the booking system and the capacity that we have on the 3 sites that are now open, we can more than manage closing that bit earlier and keep people coming through. Recommendation 4 is similar. It's an additional day closure at Llanfoist and 5 Lanes. It's about reducing costs ultimately, but again, through the booking system, we are seeing a big reduction in the number of people coming to the sites, and we know we have capacity now on the sites to manage these days. In savings terms, the additional day closure and the closure at 4 o'clock on staffing hours would reduce our cost by £240,000. So it's a substantial saving, and it manages to keep the sites open and running, and capacity and headroom still within it. So that's the recommendations 3 and 4. They're very similar recommendations, and the reasons are very similar. That's the report in full. It's a very brief thing of a very long report. I included everything in the report that I could, rather than put it into appendices. The first report that went to Cabinet, we were accused of hiding things in the appendices. Now, there's another reason that we put things in appendices is so that we can keep the report more succinct, but I've done it the other way, so the report is very big, and so apologies for everybody who's read it. And that's the basis of the report set out. I can answer questions now posed by Alison, and then I can answer some of the specific questions sent in by us Town Council and the Surf Group in a letter, because they cover most of what the other residents have put in their letters, but I have got some themes within the other letters that I'll pull out, and then obviously once I've done that, then it's open to questions from the chair and select group. Yeah. Okay. So I'll do the responses for Alison and Ask Town Council first, and then I'll move on to Select's questions. So one of Alison's questions, lots of points made, but one of your questions was, what do I say to residents of Ask when I close the site? It'll be please use the curbside service. That's why we provide a curbside service. We don't provide a curbside service for the pleasure of it. We do it for the residents, to save them making unnecessary journeys to household waste recycling centres. If there is a genuine concern about reducing air pollution, about reducing the number of trips to sites, use your curbside services. Use them well. We provide them. That's what will reduce air pollution. That's what will reduce unnecessary mileage. Alison also asked about the behaviour. Do I think the behaviour would change in Ask as it has done in the other areas? We don't know if it's changed behaviour in Mitchell Troy yet. We haven't got enough data on whether people are continuing to do in Mitchell Troy what they did. We know that people have changed their patterns at Llanfoist and 5 Lanes. We know that the recycling rate has gone up at 5 Lanes and Llanfoist, partly with the booking system, partly with the way that there's more staff on site to point people to the right skips and as well. What we have seen through those reopenings is a huge reduction in the amount of people. We started with 30 slots per 30 minutes. We are seeing around 20 people per slot booking now. If we bring in a booking system into us in the current COVID working scenario, we would only be able to get between 4 and 6 people onto that site per hour. The cost of dealing with 4 or 6 people per hour for 2 staff is phenomenal. I haven't worked it out, but it isn't viable within COVID reopening the site. I understand where Alison was coming from in COVID shouldn't close the site, but it is also not viable to open within COVID times. If we want to make an in-year saving from Viridor of £40,000 this year, we agreed with Viridor that we would close the site. If that doesn't happen, that saving doesn't come to us. So that's why the decision needs to be taken. It's not being taken off the back of COVID. COVID won't reopen the site. The site needs to close if the saving of £40,000 wants to be made. So that, although they're linked, I understand from Alison's perspective how that is linked, it's not linked from an officer recommendation perspective. We are dealing with what we are dealing with in the year now. Alison also mentioned distance people travel. As I said, I opened the report that covered that off. Residents in Chepstow are already travelling 7 miles. We are only asking residents in us to travel 10 miles. It isn't hugely different in that thing. Most of the outlying villages around us, which is where the bigger part of the population being is claimed to be using the ESC facility, will be closer to those sites. So Llantrissant, Llanllywel, Goitre, Little Mill, one is closer to 5 lanes and one is closer to Llanfoist, even closer than Usk town centre is. So there's a lot of people that are not even that 10 miles away from the sites. I've covered fly tipping. Fly tipping has increased. Again, the Daily Mail reported a 300% increase in fly tipping across the board. We didn't see a 300% increase in fly tipping. We saw a 10% increase in fly tipping. We already have a problem with fly tipping. We know there's a problem. We've promoted services into to deal with that. Those costs are already borne by the council. We are already dealing with this issue. An extra 2 per month per main town is too many, but it isn't going to reduce our costs from a staffing perspective dealing with that amount of fly tipping already. As I've explained, the cost of the closure is £40,000. The cost of keeping the site open is approximately £30,000. We haven't done the work on the survey for the interceptor. We've been given an estimated cost. That could be anything from 20,000 to 40,000 when the costs come in. But we put a budget figure in of 30,000 into the report. It's unbudgeted costs. We don't have that budget, so that will put another pressure on what is already a very difficult year for the council in finance terms. I'm just reading through Alison's notes that I made. The letters and signatures, I've read all of the letters on the weekend. As I said, the Change.org signatures are slightly different. It is a global platform, but I have read the 140 something letters, and then there's something like 400 letters which show and express their views along with SURF that they want to keep the site open. The impact on the high street and then the number of car parking spaces. I'm not sure which part Alison was not in agreement with me on the car parking spaces. There are 8 hatched spaces that have disappeared to allow the lorry to leave. There are 2 hatched spaces to allow the lorry to come in and cut the corners. And there are 8 spaces within the car park area for the site itself. That's 18 spaces that would go back into car park spaces within that car park. I agree with Alison, we did a lot of work on increasing the number of spaces when we lost the original ones, but the report sets out that they would gain another 18 spaces. So, and that's what's available should the site close. Those 18 spaces are much needed. I was in the car park myself one day delivering bags to the co-op, and there wasn't a single space in the car park available. So obviously the car park is still well used, the town is still well visited, the site is not open. So I'm not sure that it is absolutely necessary to have a waste facility in the town to draw people in to ask from that perspective. As I said, the booking system is working on the other sites, working really well. On Esk, it won't work as well. I get paid to be a officer of the council to give my opinion on things. This is my opinion. The booking system for us won't work as well as it does at the other sites because we can't keep the cars queued. If there was queuing into the car park, it causes problems in the car park, and we wouldn't push the queue out beyond to have more people in the site. I completely agree with Alison's point that we've got to be working on education. We've got to work with the population to get them to recycle more. We can do this at the curbside. We've seen a massive increase in people presenting waste and recycling at the curbside. Over 1,000 tonnes during COVID because the sites were closed. We've seen a huge uptake in use of the curbside services, and with that came an increase in recycling. So I can safely say that people who use the curbside recycling and curbside collection systems and don't have reliance of a household waste recycling centre recycle better. We have the data to back that up. So whatever the decision on the Esk closure is, we believe that we need to do more work with the residents to get them recycling more at the curbside as well. And we know from the compositional analysis of the black bags going into all the sites, not just Esk, there is a large proportion of recycled material in those bags. Hopefully that's answered Alison's questions. I got a letter from Esk Town Council and the Surf Group that I can read out and respond to as I'm reading out, if that's okay. There was a lot of support for the Surf Group. For the people that watched the video then, the Surf banners are all over Esk. I'm not quite sure how the Surf banners, and I understand the people who've signed up to it are asking for us to keep the site open. I'm not sure that anything that Surf has made claims that they will achieve through it are actually achievable. Improving the health and safety executive, I'm not sure how that can be achieved by keeping Esk open. I'm not sure how we can improve recycling keeping Esk open. I'm not sure how we can reduce costs keeping Esk open. I'm not sure how those claims add to anything, but I do understand the sentiment of the people that they want to keep the site open as a local community. So for Esk Town Council, you will have all seen these letters, but I'll read through it because this covers the most points and covers a lot of the other question raised. So the Esk Town Council understanding from the meeting held in January 2020 is the council acknowledged there had been a lack of consultation in respect of the proposal and that further consultation in respect of the proposals would apply to Esk. So yes, we agreed that we would do a consultation. We never agreed that it would be specific to Esk. We always agreed that it was going to be a much wider consultation. Consultation did take part. It ran from March the 10th to April the 10th. Esk Town Council were fully aware of the consultation and asked us to extend that consultation date. Normally we would run consultations for 2 to 3 weeks because if you see a consultation come through, you're more likely to fill it in the same day rather than wait. We see very little coming in after week 2, week 3. So we were looking for a consultation of 3 weeks. We extended it by an extra 10 days on the request from Esk Town Council. As I said, it did go on to the change org petition as well. So it should, in theory, have been widely received across the board. It was covered in the Argus, it was covered in the Abergavenny Chronicle, as well as all of the social media feeds from Monmouthshire Council. So the survey was put out very well. We had 959 responses. That's not a huge amount of responses, Laura's covering the garden waste consultation. The garden waste consultation, we had 6,000 responses. We had 1,000 of them in the first hour of the consultation going live. So that hopefully display, you know, we know that people are concerned about the garden waste and had a lot of things that they wanted to say to us about the garden waste. It didn't appear that that was the case for the household waste recycling centres survey. So the ask letter goes on to say that there's no evidence presented of any alternatives having been considered or a clear rationale as to why the one site was selected. I would have hoped that the report highlighted all of the reasons why ask was put forward for closure, small site, poor recycling, the costs of running the service, the £40,000 saving. They are all part of the report, and I'm not 100% sure where the difficulty is of the rationale for that. And there's a full options appraisal within the report. We did look at other things we could do. We looked at recycling only for ask. As officers, we don't feel that that would work in ask, and talking to residents and some members of the town council, they don't believe that that would work either. Banning black bags from a site is what has been suggested by some of the people in the letters. But if we don't have a residual waste skip at ask, it won't just be black bags. It will be everything that we can recycle on our site, people can't bring in there. Whether it's a small piece of carpet or a little bit of wood or whatever the facilities are we've got on our site that we can't recycle on our site, we would have to turn them people away. And we know that that is going to cause problems. We know it because people who use the facility and get turned away with materials we can't recycle there now cause problems, and it would just increase. I've had a picture sent through of a mattress dumped in Lambaddock Church. If there's no residual waste on the HWRC and ask, that mattress will still be fly tipped because we'll have nowhere to put our mattress. So that's the reason that we discounted a recycling only facility at ask. It would also potentially halve the amount of tonnage going into ask, meaning that it would be considerably less tonnage, and the cost then would be even more disproportionate to what we're dealing with on our site. So those are the reasons we discounted that. I was asked about smaller skips on the site, meaning we wouldn't need the big lorry. If we quarter the size of the skips on site, we'll empty the skips 4 times more often. That's the logic of that. The skips are chosen because of this size and reducing the amount of skip movements we need to do. If we quarter the size of the skips, there'll be 4 times as many large lorry movements through that car park, and that's not something that we want. We looked at unmanned facilities, glorified bring banks. We removed them across Wales, and when we rolled out curbside recycling, there's no need for them types of services anymore. We collected at the doorstep now for everyone. Just use the doorstep scheme. We briefly looked at whether the site could be run by Ask Town Council or another. I've had a few calls from businesses who are interested in running the site. Again, opinion of me as an officer is I wouldn't go down that road. Opening the site with someone else running it could bring another load of problems for the residents of Ask if that facility isn't run properly. So I wouldn't suggest it, but we looked at it. So there was a good range of alternative options within the report that we covered. My apologies. I'm beginning to tire of my own voice now, so I feel really sorry for everyone else. The permits and the unchallenged and not challenging people on site. We have many compliments about the staff on site, the fact that it isn't run as a regime, and the staff on Ask site were very helpful. In being very helpful, yes, they probably didn't check the permits as rigidly as they were supposed to. I'm not sure where somebody would have put the permit wheeling a wheelbarrow in, but you know, the permits were done for vehicles. We didn't see I understand what Alison is saying on how close Newport is, but we didn't see a huge amount of cross-border waste coming into Usk when we did earlier consultations with people on site. We did see a huge amount coming into Abergavenny, and we did see a lot going into 5 Lanes. Composition analysis, which was part of the agreement with the consultation, was carried out on Usk, and between the decision being put in abeyance and everyone in Usk understanding that the site may close through poor recycling, when we did the composition analysis in February, it was worse. So there was even greater level of recyclate in the bins. I think it went up to 72% from 65%. So there was more waste in the black bags than previously. So we know that people put waste in the black bags. We know why people go to the sites, and there's more work to be done. That's why the report last year was agreed that we would start black bag sorting. That was due to start in April, and obviously through COVID that's been delayed, but we are now starting to implement that on the other sites as well. The Usk Town Council are disputing that making local waste disposal an easy option can't achieve high recycling rates, and greater participation in curbside collection wouldn't have that impact either. I hope the report set that out. We have seen a huge increase in recycling rates at the CA sites now with at Llanfoist and 5 Lanes, and we've seen an increased recycling rate at the curbside. The increased recycling rate at the curbside is on top of a huge increase in waste being put out and collected. So that's really important for us. That's now up on 64%. We need the sites to be achieving over 64% to keep our recycling rate up. We can't return to the days of centres achieving 50, 51%. We need to move forward with that. Trying to catch up with where I am now. There's some stuff around the visitors to sites. As I said in the report, we've seen a huge reduction in the number of people coming to the sites, partly to do with the booking system, but I think it's just a change in what people feel is important to them now. We've all seen an improvement in getting out into the countryside and getting out into nature across the board. People are using their leisure time more sensibly now, and hopefully not buying as much rubbish just to create rubbish to throw it away. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to drive forward. If we want to have a real impact on climate change, it's not keeping sites open, it's reducing the amount we buy and throw away. That's what is important. Use the curbside services. If you don't want to drive to a site, that will really reduce the amount of carbon emissions. They've asked about the survey being used to gather general data. I hope I've highlighted that that's exactly what the survey was for. There were bigger questions than just closing Usk, and those questions were asked across the thing. The Usk Town Council have said that of the responses, 25% agreed with the closure of one of the sites, 75% didn't. That we're ignoring those responses. We're not ignoring those responses, but we're taking them in context of all the other evidence that we have for the closure of the site. On the survey, one of the questions was about a black bag sorting area on the sites. That was the least important thing by a very, very long way for all of the residents across the board, wherever they are. Everybody said that was the least important. From a council perspective and in driving up recycling rates, it is one of the most important. So we have to take surveys at face level, and we have to use the evidence that we have and the data that we have in making some of those decisions as well, regardless of what those decisions are. I think I've probably covered the bulk of the questions from Usk Town Council. one of the points made in both the video and in quite a lot of the letters was a reduction in the garden waste service. We are not reducing the garden waste service. There is no, if people have got 20 bags now and want to replace them with 20 bins, they're more than welcome to have 20 bins. There's no thing. Actually, from a garden waste perspective, we believe the bins would probably offer a better service than the bags and would give some storage for the winter. I'm not going to cover the garden waste service because that's for Laura, but there was quite a few comments about garden waste and the closure of Usk, so I just wanted to cover that off in here as well. Of the letters, there were the main themes were around fly tipping, the distance to the site, and again the garden waste. Usk is 10 miles equidistance from the two sites. That is not a huge amount of mileage to travel. As Alison said, it's very difficult to compare apples and apples when I was talking about Newport, Torvine and other areas, but I can talk about Chepstow. Chepstow is a much bigger town and travel 7 miles to a site. They are equally concerned about the distance they travel. The difference being they've always travelled that far. It's not unreasonable to ask residents of Usk and the surrounding areas to travel those sorts of distances as well when we ask many of the residents in Monmouthshire to already travel those distances. In the report, we did a 9-mile radius around the sites. A 9-mile radius as the crow flies, Usk would be within striking distance of 5 lanes and Llanfoist. If we did a 2.5-mile radius around the sites as Usk is suggesting for their residents, that's far enough for them to travel, we would need something like 14 sites across Monmouthshire to give everyone that same level of cover. There would need to be 3 sites between Chepstow and 5 lanes to give the same level of cover that they've got in Usk at the moment. So the fly tipping is obviously, I can't say enough times fly tipping is against the law. People shouldn't do it. People were doing it before the sites were closed. We have quite high levels of incidences, 480 incidences last year, doing the same 5 months compared to 530 this year. They are not massively different and certainly do not reflect what the Daily Mail and others were saying. Hopefully, we don't all agree with some of the stuff going into the Daily Mail, and that kind of set the scene for a lot of the requests to reopen the sites that weren't reflected across any of the neighbouring authorities in Wales or us. 300% was not seen across the board anywhere near that in Wales. I've covered off the garden waste. There were some other queries from Usk residents that they pay the most rates, they deserve more services, they haven't got access to the bigger facilities of the bigger towns. Lots of those kind of comments were in the letters, and hopefully everyone's read those letters as well, but they're not particularly pertinent to the question in hand around the closure of the site, the booking system, and the extra closure day and the reduced hours. So I'm not going to cover those off within this report. I hope that's covered everybody's questions, and I put it back to the chair and the select now to ask some more if they answer my voice.
Never sick of your voice, Carl, never. Thank you, Carl, for that comprehensive presentation. I'd now like to begin by inviting the Strong Community Select Committee members only the first opportunity to speak. Obviously, we weren't able to do the introduction, so I ask if you do want to speak, can you just introduce yourself and which ward you are members for? So who would like to go first, members, if you'd like to show your hands? Are there any select committee members wishing to speak? Okay, so first of all, I've got Councillor Trahan, and then I've got Councillor Dimitri Batruni.
Thank you, Chair. My question to Carl is, with the savings on staffing and reduced hours on the day closure, does that include Usk or is that separate of Usk, please? Thank you.
The day closures and the savings through the reduction in hours got nothing at all to do with USC. We haven't included USC in those figures, so they are separate of USC. The closure of USC is a £40,000 saving in its own right. The £240,000 savings for the day closures and the additional hours are set across the other 3 sites.
Okay. Is that 40,000 for this financial year, or is that every year? If not, what is the cost of a full year's closure of USC site, please?
So the savings of 40,000 is an in-year saving for this year. The site is currently open 5 days a week. That's 50 hours per week. There's 2 staff on site. That's where that saving comes from. It's roughly 20,000 per member of staff. The staff on that site at the moment are, well, the staff on the site at the moment are not staff on that site because the site isn't open, but they were agency staff, and so they are currently being utilised at the bigger sites to help manage the COVID response. Viridor has agreed to give us the £40,000 this year, providing the site is closed, because they would then go in, clear the skips from there, take away their office facility, shut down their permit, and close that side of it. So the savings from our perspective are just on staff for this year. We don't know what the savings would be next year, but I would assume that if we haven't got 2 staff on site, we're going to be for 50 hours, we will definitely save £40,000 next year. Non-moving skips from USC and taking them back to Land Foist will save more money again, because we won't have them additional transport costs back and forth to USC with our site. So I'm not 100% sure what they will work out in the new tender, but I would have thought it's roughly £60,000, that sort of reduction in the tender price if we close USC for next year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Laura Jones and then Councillor Petruni, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say thank you very much to Carl for that comprehensive report and his answers. I mean, it's taken away a lot of the questions that I had, because you have thoroughly covered most of the concerns of USC residents and myself. Also, want to take this opportunity to thank everybody that's taken the time and effort to input into our committee, into this committee and this particular report. It's really important that people do that. So it's lovely to see that people care and obviously feel strongly enough to do so. I'm a member the member for Wisham. I didn't introduce myself, sorry, Lisa. However, I'm an USC resident, so I'd like to say a few words if that's okay. I have been here all my life, after all, and Monmouthshire is a wonderful place, but geographically it does lend itself to more than one recycling centre. We don't come into that. I know the Welsh Government recommend one, but our area is slightly different to others. So we do need to adapt, and it is important that we do so. Monmouthshire County Council, all credit to them. They have 4 recycling centres at the moment, and that's a big credit to them actually. And it's also very needed. The USC closure will have the biggest hit on the elderly, as Alison outlined. But there are, for those that are able to travel, it will increase the traffic. It will increase the amount of travel across Monmouthshire. On the 20-mile round trip they'd have to take to go to a recycling centre. And although, as Carl rightly points out, everyone else does that, or something similar, it doesn't make it any better, because after all, our aim, Monmouthshire County Council aim, is green futures. So I do have some concerns in that regard, and I don't think we can brush it off that easily, because the numbers of traffic will increase. The curbside behaviour has improved and increased over the pandemic, which is fantastic. And we've got to do everything we can to actively encourage that. Now, in a lot of the evidence that was given to us and that you suggested, that greater education is needed. And I do agree. I do think that that's something that the committee and the council need to look into for the other sites, if not for us going forward. I do share the concerns, obviously, that the Usk site is safety-wise isn't perfect at all. The fact that it needs £30,000 spent on it, we could use the car parking spaces. You know, there are positives that could come with not having the site at all. But you know, it has become clear that even though the curbside collection is increasing, people using it, they don't feel that their needs are still being fulfilled. And I'm just wondering how much work, Carl, that has been actually gone into sort of coming up with a halfway house solution of having some sort of site elsewhere, maybe in the county council car park where it's CCTV'd, so it could be unmanned rather than manned, that sort of thing. I know you said you wrote it off, but I just wondering how much work was put into that, maybe looking at other sites very close to us, so the concerns around the elderly would be covered. And also, if you strongly suggest that the curbside collection is the only way forward, but in that case, how much work is being done to increase what can be recycled at the curbside? Because I think that would obviously allay a lot of concerns and cover a lot of the concerns that residents have written in and said about. You've also said that you won't, you can't reopen the site at the moment, so we get improved data. Yeah, the halfway house thing was my biggest concern. I'd just like to hear what you had to say on that, really, and the better education I wanted to get across. Thank you. That's all. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll try and cover them all the points. Elderly residents, obviously, there's a growing number of elderly residents across Monmouthshire. I wasn't trying to dismiss the distance and the aged population of us by saying that other people have got to do it, so have they. I understand that we have to try and work with everyone across the county. So my apologies if it come over as that. That wasn't the intention. For the elderly residents, the curbside service is the best way for them to deal with their waste. We can collect it from them at point. There was a lot of queries by proxy, not actually people who couldn't drive, but in saying the elderly people, especially if they haven't got a car, how will they get their waste to site? We don't see a large number of elderly people walking into the site. It just doesn't happen. And I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that somebody elderly carries a washing machine through the car park. It doesn't happen. We provide a comprehensive curbside recycling service. We are always looking to improve that. We're always looking to improve the amount of materials we can collect, but actually people have got to use it. So during the COVID pandemic at the start, when people started using the service properly, we'd seen a big increase in recycling. That's what we need to continue with. We need to continue with our message that recycling at the curb and having the curbside collections is the best way forward. That stops the pollution, that stops anybody needing to travel anywhere. I use I live in Torvine. I'm born in Usk, but live in Torvine. If I use the facilities in Torvine once a year, I've used them once too many. So I don't go to those facilities for that number of time. I don't see that the majority of people should be using the facilities that often. I don't understand why they need to be there. Why 71% of the residents in Usk need to be there every week. I just don't understand what they need to get rid of that is that much waste that they can produce. If they are producing that much waste, we need a different education campaign. We need one around stop buying all this rubbish that you are throwing away. That's the education we need. It's about reduction of waste rather than the sites. The distance travelled for everyone can be reduced by using those curbside collections. So the argument of air pollution and carbon, if that is a genuine argument, the curbside is the best way forward. Usk already has issue with air pollution in the town centre. Is it right that we're bringing in, or were pre-COVID bringing in 170 cars through Usk and large lorries to service the site, adding to that problem in Usk town centre? You can look at, we can look at the carbon and the air pollution from a very different angle about dragging everybody into Usk, which is a town that already has an air pollution problem. So that hopefully that answers those questions.
Can I ask Councillor Petrini to come in now with your questions?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't realise Laura Ann Jones was a member of this committee, Chair, but I could be proven wrong. I do have a few questions and I wish to make a recommendation, if I may, Chair. My first query to Carl is, why do you let the site get this bad? If it's so bad and so in a need of repairs and change, then why did you let it get to crisis point? Why wasn't this stopped earlier? Why wasn't this thought through earlier? It seems like it's allowed to get to crisis point and then, oh, well, we have to close it. And I would like a comprehensive answer to that, please. I would also like a clarification, if Carl may. We use Viridor on our sites, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, please correct me. My recollection is that Torvine scrapped that service in 2015 to do an in-house service that saved them up to £167,000 a year. Was that option explored on the presumption we do use Viridor recycling sites? Because Torvine found that bulking and selling the resources themselves made more financial sense. I look forward to your response on that. I want to question Mr. Toohig's comparison of survey responses around changing the garden waste, where the 6,000 responses, to the one about recycling centres. Residents will respond to garden waste because it affects all residents across the whole county. Closing Usk, which was the main concern of this report, really only affects Usk and surrounding areas, so the responses will be less. And I think 900, given Usk's population, is actually really significant turnout of residents and showing their concerns. So I think Mr. Tu is comparing apples with pears. Older population, take your point about curbside, makes complete sense. Having said that, there's still stuff you cannot recycle that requires travelling to a centre of sorts, and still an older population would find that more difficult. And if you look at the census, I don't know if Mr. Tuig has, that the older population in Usk and the surrounding areas is quite significantly higher than areas like Chepstow, Caldicot, Abergavenny. So I would wonder his thoughts on that. And on the Usk Town Council, and I think Alison spoke wonderfully and captured the points I would have loved to make as eloquently as she did, is my recollection of Usk Town Councils that it's always stepped up when MCC have said to Usk something has to change, we need financial help. The Usk Town Council has always stepped up to encourage that change and take on financial responsibility for centres in Usk. For example, the Hub. They're also paying half the costs for the post office in Usk. They help fund renovation to the toilet and baby facilities. They've also agreed to put some funding towards resurfacing of the North Car Park. They're also half paying for the consultations around Usk Master Plan and many more. So when Usk Town Council and its residents have been asked to up their game, improve the service, help financially, they've always stepped up to the game. And I think, paraphrasing what Alison and other residents have said, is give us a chance to improve the recycling rates, give us a chance to improve the concerns you have, give us a chance to help with these costs, and we will do our best. If it doesn't work, then close the site. But I feel like it's almost, they could say anything and the mind's made up. We're closing this site, say what you like, it doesn't really matter. And that's the impression I am getting. And I totally support smaller local services. And I'm surprised the Cabinet haven't backed that message from SURF, because every other decision I've heard from the Cabinet was being smaller and local was better on climate change, better on any social measure you can look at. Yet this one seems to be not that message, seems to be a message of bigger, travelling further. That's the message here. Bigger, travelling further, move people out of the rural sites. And Mr. Toohig talked about disproportionate costs of Usk. That's because Usk and the surrounding areas are a rural site. You're comparing it to major urban centres. Now, I'm a councillor that represents an urban centre. You cannot compare costs between a rural centre and an urban centre because of the population. So, of course, it's going to be disproportionate. But this council, as far as I was meant to believe, and this cabinet were about protecting rural areas, protecting sites and amenities in rural areas. And that the complaint to Welsh Government was that they had disproportionate costs in comparison to major urban centres like Cardiff because of this rurality. And now they're deploying the same rationale to scrap a recycling centre for a rural population. And it just baffles my mind. And I think, as a committee, we should adhere to the strong message of this council that's been consistent for years and years and years, that we scrap recommendation B, and we say we give Usk more time. Us Town Council, the SURF Action Group, the residents of Ann say, okay, these are the issues, we want these resolved. We give you more time to come up with rationale and a practical, workable plan to deliver what we need it to be delivered. And I think we should give them the time to do it, Chair. So that's my recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Petruni. Just before I let Carl come back in on your questions, apologies for allowing Councillor Jones to come in. That was an error on my behalf.
Okay, so I'll cover the points as they were raised. We haven't let us get to a crisis point. We've known about the works that are needed there for a while. As Alison said, we've already invested in that site to keep it running. The site has always been very poor performing. The rest of Monmouthshire is very high performing, and we're able to carry that site. So it's not that we've let it get to a crisis point and haven't realised. We've always known that it's poor performing. We had the survey work done with Eunomia on site in 2018, which highlighted the issues with the drainage. The report was pulled together then in 2019, looking for closure of the site. So these things, I'm sure Councillor will appreciate, take time to go through. So what the crisis point was in that sense. Everyone else is doing more, and Usk was doing less. So we've known that for a long time. We were faced with potential fines of upwards of £120,000 last year, and we needed to make some decisions on how we were going to drive up our recycling rate, and that's when Usk was considered to be closed. Viridor, so Torvine used to work with Viridor, and Viridor operated the curbside collection bulking facility. Torvine took that back in-house. Torvine's household waste recycling centres are run by FCC, which is a company similar to Viridor. So it wasn't quite as as simple as them taking it back in-house. It was a very different service that they were operating. We have looked at bringing the service back in-house as part of the tender process, and we're quite happy to look at that if the tenders come back at a price where we feel that we could do the service ourselves at the same cost. So we've already done our work, and that is how we will take the tender process forward. I hope that I've done justice for the Usk responses. There were a lot of them, and I have tried to answer them. There is a more elderly demographic in Usk, but the curbside services should be used to support that. A lot of the letters were saying that they were older people and they use the site every day. So what we're trying to do is get people to use the facilities that we provide at the curbside rather than relying on these sites, particularly as the site is so poor performing and such a large amount of black bag waste going into the facility. I haven't discussed cost sharing with Usk Town Council, and Usk Town Council haven't offered to share the costs to my knowledge. So it's not just about the cost of running the facility, This is about achieving our recycling rates. For the waste that goes into Usk, if we miss our target by the same proportion of waste, residual waste that goes into Usk, we'll be paying almost £200,000 in fines. I'm not sure how we share those costs with us Town Council. It's not just the cost of £40,000, which is a relatively small cost compared to the risk of fines on not achieving our recycling rate. There will be a bigger element of travel, clearly for residents of Usk to travel to these sites, but not if they use the recycling, the curbside collection system. There are some materials that can't be recycled at the curbside, but we offer other solutions. So homemakers will come and pick up 3 bulky items for £15 from people. We think that's a really good scheme to get rid of the bigger, bulkier items rather than undertake them to the site themselves. The councillor mentioned about it being an urban site and the difference in cost between an urban site and a rural site. 5 lanes is not an urban site. 5 lanes is a rural site which services urban areas. So those residents from those urban areas of Caldicot and Chepstow travel to 5 lanes, which is a relatively rural site. In travelling there, they think about the waste that they bring in there and recycle more. That's the data that we have. In Usk, the ease of access to it is driving bad behaviour. It's not all to do with the residents of Usk. The site is also too small, but there is a larger number of black bags taken to that site than we would see in 5 lanes. Hopefully I've covered all of the councillor's points off.
Thank you, Carl. Councillor Petrini, would you like to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on those
points. Put your
points.
Video on.
I'm trying, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Absolutely, 5 lanes is in a rural site, but you knew what I was saying. It serves an urban population, and it's therefore the demographic is different and the rate of use is different. In terms of Usk, I don't think anyone is saying Usk doesn't need to improve in terms of recycling rates. I've heard no one say that change doesn't need to happen. I think what they're saying is we know change needs to happen. Allow us the time to make that change happen, work in conjunction with the town council and residents to improve the recycling rates. I think that's the message, and I think that's the message being ignored. In terms of Torvine, can we see the business plan when it's ready, or if it's ready, in relation to possibly bring it in-house? Because my understanding is Torvine halved their cost when they did that, and that'll be significant financial saving for this council and hopefully help with any Usk business plan. So I would really appreciate if you could share that with us, the cost and a business plan. And on Usk, and in terms of the cost, I think you're being slightly mischievous there, Ms. Toohig, in relation to saying that Usk Town Council have to take up the fine. The fine would be applied to county-wide. It wouldn't be applicable to a town council. So it wouldn't be £200,000. What I was referring to was an operating cost of £30,000, and I believe you mentioned a £60,000 on top of that of transporting. I'm not saying they will, but I bet they'll be up for the conversation, and I suspect you haven't had that conversation. I think indeed you admitted you haven't had that conversation. Why haven't you had that conversation, considering us Town Council have worked with MCC quite helpfully in many other areas when MCC have asked for help? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can we have questions from Councillor Eason now? You're on mute, Tony. Tony, you're on mute.
I'm live again now. Yes, some of the points I wanted to make have been made, especially by Laura, in terms of is there another site adjacent to us which would be suitable. But I'll come back to the statistics that Carl has said. He mentions using the word black bags. Usk presents 25% black bags, Mitchell Troy 30%, Landfoist 25%, and 5 Lanes 25%. So in terms of black bags going to recycling centres, Usk is no different than anybody else. But I do agree with him that black bags should not contain recyclable materials, and I would support him on that. And I think that the problem with all the sites possibly, and Usk in particular, is that the monitoring of black bags going to these sites doesn't seem to be being done. So really, I support Councillor Batrui's comments that we ought to review this over the next period of time rather than make a decision on this today, because if we monitor these matters more closely, Usk could be put into a better position than that it is being portrayed. The other area within Usk is that garden waste. There's a lot of garden waste being put, 30% garden waste. These are areas which, in all the sites, there's a great propensity of waste being delivered. So in terms of all the sites, Usk is no different than the others. So that wouldn't be a good reason for making a closure. I think there should be a way of looking at the other recyclables, which can be visibly seen and visibly recycled at the point of the site. Maybe, as Councillor Dimitri says, that Usk, we should look at Usk in a different way. It is central, it is for a small area, but it is basically rural, and it does serve an elderly population. So really and truly, we should be looking at how we can use Usk in a better way. I think it's more I understand the car parking problems there, but when you're running the two big sites at 5 Lanes and Landfoist, it's in and out, in and out. You don't have the opportunity to really crack down on problems such as what is not being recycled properly. And Usk in particular doesn't have the unique facility that we got in the south of the county, where if you put something outside your front gate on a Monday evening, by a wave of a wand, it's gone on a Tuesday morning. Whereas they'd have to pay £15 in Usk, because I'm not sure whether that facility happens to be there. It's a useful one, but there we are. I would support Councillor Batrui's view that we should relook at Usk in the round, and also maybe look at numbers of certain days it would be open for use, and encourage everybody in all the sites not to use black bags as a reason for just dumping stuff on a site. A lot of stuff could be recycled. As I know within my ward, black bags hide a multitude of sins, and there's a lot of recyclates within all the black bags in all parts of the county. So I don't think I have much more to say on this, because a lot of the points have been made, but I would like to see further surveys done and further initiatives taken in Usk particularly, and maybe use Usk as a template of how we can apply the same facilities, of same operations within Mitchell Drive, 5 Lanes and Landfoist. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Carl, do you want to come in and respond to Councillor Eason's queries?
Yeah. So the charts that Councillor Eason is talking about with the percentages of waste, they are the respondents' perceptions of what they bring to the site. That is not reflected in actually what is brought to the site. There's a much larger amount of black bags brought into Usk than the 25% figure that people believe they're bringing into Usk. So it's the respondents' views, not actual data. The data from that is that 53% of the waste brought into Usk is black bags. We've agreed and we are about to implement black bag sorting at all the sites, which would include Usk if Usk is decided that it needs to stay open. It will be very difficult at Usk to go through black bags, because we don't have facilities to take that material and put it somewhere else. So having asked someone to open a black bag, we don't then have the facilities to put that material anywhere else. So that's a real concern of black bag sorting if we try to do that on Usk. For Councillor Jones's thing, which I didn't cover, we have looked at the other facilities. We did look at moving the Usk facility to somewhere else in Usk. People don't want waste sites next to them. Everybody wants to keep the ones that are open, but nobody wants a new one. I'm not convinced that we would actually get planning permission on the Rada site or the Riverside site with the flood risk for a waste facility. If waste facilities in Usk in general have not gone down well, there's been quite a few petitions regarding an AD plant and a biomass plant, amongst some others. So opening another waste facility is unlikely to get planning permission, and then you've got to get permitting on top of that. And NRW would certainly be looking at the flood risk for reopening another facility anyway in Usk. I don't actually think if we tried to open the Usk site where it currently is now, we would get planning permission or permitting for a site so close to residential properties in a flood zone. It's there already, so we don't have that issue, but I don't think you'd get a planning and permitting on another site in Usk.
Chair, could I make one comment on response? I find it a bit odd that Carl should say that the illustrations we got are not really representative of what is actually there. So why put an illustration there to give us an impression that you say is not correct? Facts are the important thing, and based on those illustrations, I took those as being broadly factual. And if they're not factual, let's have factual images. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to Councillor Webb.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm Councillor Ann Webb and I represent Tintern and St Albans, quite a rural area. But on many occasions I have used the Usk facility, I have to say, and found the people there really helpful. Can I first of all, Lisa, say thank you to you for your chairmanship, and also all the papers that were put together today. It's amazing what Hazel and other officers have put together for us to look at, and I would have thought that we would have had most of the information in those papers. Personally, I have plenty to look at, and I really thank you all for all the work that you've done that, because it was quite a big job, to be honest with you. But there's just one small thing that I just want to put into the pot. Is there, Carl, could there possibly be any receptacle for small electrical items in Usk? Kettles and you know, toasters and things like this that are broken down, perhaps in a corner somewhere. Would that be at all possible? Because I'm sure that would help the people of Usk, who I quite understand their problems. I quite have listened to everything that has been said today, and it's been really interesting. And I just wondered if you could clear up that point with me. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so some of the biggest supermarkets have offered to take back small electrical items. We could look to see if we could put a facility there to do that. The difficulty with unmanned recycling facilities is they do attract a lot of fly tipping. That was the reason that they all got taken out in the beginning. There was quite a lot of incidences of arson on some of the sites throughout Torvine, not so much in Monmouthshire. But we could look at somewhere to put a small container, waste electrical items. We could look at that in Usk if that would help.
Can I just come back? I'm sure the good people of Usk could monitor this if there wasn't such a thing. That I'm sure the good people of Usk would monitor it for us to make sure that it wasn't being used in the wrong way. Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any members of the Strong Community Select Committee? Councillor Smith?
Yes, please. Am I on mic? Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. It's all to do with money, really, isn't it? Because £40,000, if we continue with this service in Usk, we have to reduce the service somewhere else, and it's worth thinking. Right, I'm getting my thoughts organised, Chairman. I thought it was quite interesting. I liked Alison's logic that 20 houses, or the council tax from 20 properties in Usk, would actually cover the cost of the site. Now, we do deliver some other services in Monmouthshire. You know, we deliver social services, education, leisure. It's the hub, the car parks, the infrastructure, and that refuse collection. So we do actually, hang on, my battery's running flat. Come on, work, that's it. So we have to think, where is the money going to come from? If we carry on with this service, where does it come from? Now, as you're probably aware, I'm a mature citizen. I live in the rural outback. I use the service. And quite frankly, I am intrigued with what people put in their black bags. I have a husband here that I feed every now and then, and we put our black bag out, and we put it out perhaps once a month. So what exactly are people finding to dispose of so regularly? The black bags. Yes, we can't monitor. That site in Usk is incredibly constrained. Dimitri wants to know, why has it been allowed to get like that? Well, it sort of evolved, as so many things evolve through life, Dimitri, and you realise as you get more mature, they happen and they happen along. The Torfine sites, over the years, they've been able to, well, it's a site, there's only one site, I think, in Torfine, isn't there, unless there's another. They've accessed grants that were not available to Monmouthshire. They've got a superb site there at the Polo Grounds. I'd suggest to members they go and look at how recycling is actually done in Torfine, real segregation. So there's been more money available. I've got a real concern. I've stood frequently in the car park observing. I find that skip trundling through the little back streets of Usk and through the car park hazardous. It's a danger, it's a pollutant. There are health and safety issues. You have an air quality monitoring system. Well, it's not really helping it very much. You want to retain every service, we all do. We don't want change, we don't want change. But if in the backwoods here, I note my local residents using the black bag system, once a fortnight, those bags go out, and we don't seem to have enormous issues about tripping down to Usk frequently. If we retain that site, members, you've got to decide where the money comes from, what service you are going to take to retain that service. And you certainly can't retain that service in the condition that it is now. I've used those skips, I've clambered up and down those steps, they are downright hazardous at times. What you can take there is limited, and I can quite understand, Carl, that when I took the church organ there to recycle, they felt they could not accept it and we had to take it to Land Foist, but they tried very hard to find somebody who'd like a church organ that didn't function. So limited scope as to what you can actually get there. The point that you have made, Carl, about nobody really wants a recycling centre next door to their premises. You have a lot of problems. What is there is not satisfactory. I think it is regrettable to lose any surface. But look to the future, look what you could actually do in Usk with the additional car parking spaces, because there again, I am hoping that this evening I might find a car parking space so that I can pick up stuff from my doctor. Because the last time I went down, there was no car parking space. That's not very good for Usk. Look to the future, Usk. I think this is a difficult situation. Nobody wants to lose a service. This isn't a good service. We operate an excellent refuse collection. In the event that you've got a lot of big stuff, we've got a service that can provide that. Okay, you've got to pay for it, but that's one of the cruel things of life. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Are there any more members that wish to ask questions now before I move on to other council members? Okay. Is the cabinet member on? Councillor Pratt, are you on? Would you like to come in after the Strong Communities questions and comments then?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my role today is very much to listen to everything that's going to be said. Obviously, we will have the Cabinet meeting on October the 7th, but I'd much rather the time be used up today with members. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I'll open it up to other members who have kindly attended today's meeting. So I've got Councillor Howarth and then Councillor Powell.
Good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you, Lisa. All right, good afternoon, Cabinet members. and the wider audience there. I'd just like to ask the officer there a couple of questions. Number one is, you're emphasising that the residents of Usk can use the, hopefully we'll be introducing the new scheme for green waste. But it's been pointed out there that a lot of the residents in Usk and a lot of use facilities are quite elderly, or a bit like myself. We're not as mobile as we used to be, and whatever. And you can have as many bags as you want. I mean, I have the reservations about trailing a wheelie bin for a lot of the elderly people with 4 or 5 bags of green waste in there. They're very cumbersome anyway. So when they're full of green waste, I do feel that it's not going to be easy, and will people then want to buy into that service, because that's about money as well. So that's one of my questions to you, Carl. Number two, does green waste help with our targets for recycling? Because I believe it does, and I believe it used to anyway. I believe that green waste helps us significantly in reaching our targets for recycling on the basis of is the weight matter of it. So I am really scared now that we start tinkering around with waste on a bigger picture here, Chair, but we're taking a facility away from Usk. Usk, yes, it's not ideal, and perhaps the black bag should be removed from there, like many people are agreeing there, no black bags at all. But try and retain what we've got there. And I'll give you an example. Go to Crickowell. Crickowell have exactly the same facilities as what Usk have, but no black bag waste. Another example, go to Langunida. Been there this morning. You got plenty of facilities in their car park at Langunida. No complaints about who picks it up or what wagons go in there or whatever. Yes, it's not a busy little place like Usk, but the timings for pickups can be made different with the contractor, and I suppose we have looked at that. I think we're looking at excuses here, and I'm going to go with Dimitri on this one. I'm not a member of the committee, but I still believe that we need to further investigate. Can Usk Town Council provide some of these facilities with the council, perhaps at a different location, and remove the black bag residual waste drop off? And I think that could work for the people of Usk. I do feel sorry for them, and I quite get the point of travelling up to Landfoist. And I get the point, as you get elderly, you don't get out as much. You don't want to be travelling when it's raining, or you don't want to be travelling when it's a bad night or a bad day. But it's easy to pop up into town and drop off your recyclers. I get all that, because they are right in what they say. So I do believe, I think we need to spend a bit of time here on thinking, is there an alternative for some of these facilities to be retained in Usk? May not be in the car park. I do not buy into this one of we need planning permission to put a green bin in a position. I do not buy that one, because many local communities have been looking at putting in facilities for recycling themselves, working in partnership. So I do not buy that. I do not buy the aerobic digesters and incinerators and classing that for us. I do not buy that. But what I do buy is that if we do not, as an authority, step up the mark, as we used to do, we're tinkering too much, Chair, with waste and recycling, we will not reach our target. Landfoist still has a board there with 72.4% of recycling. I bet we're down to 60-something%. And tomorrow, Adult Select Committee have got 2 papers on their agenda, and you'll be quite surprised. Bonfires. The amount of fires being investigated now and smokes within our towns and our communities, people burning rubbish. It's there, it's evidence-based. So I am a little bit scared now of where we're going to go with all this long term. £200,000, a lot of money. Is Usk £40,000? In the bigger picture, I still believe we can work with this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Carl, do you want to come back in on Councillor Harris' points raised?
Thanks, Councillor. There was some confusion on the survey that went out, or the responses that came back for Strong Community Select from some of the residents in Usk, that we were reducing the garden waste scheme, we're not reducing it. We are looking at a different option, which is bins instead of bags. So that hopefully that clears that up. The green waste target, the green waste contributes to our targets, whether that's people bringing it through the household waste recycling centre in the curbside scheme. So it does have a big impact on our targets, which is why we want to continue with collecting the green waste at the curbside and clearly collecting the green waste at the household waste recycling centres as well. The sites in Powys, that the Bring sites in Powys take a range of domestic recyclate at them, so paper, cans, plastic bottles, those kind of materials, and we collect them at the curbside. When Powys now collects more materials at the curbside as well, and has reduced the amount of Bring sites across the county massively. They took out the garden waste skips that were at the unmanned Bring sites quite a few months ago because of the abuse they were getting. I don't know if they've taken the ones out in Langunada, but certainly they have taken the ones out in Crickhowl. We can look at Bring sites. I wasn't suggesting that we'd need planning permission for Bring sites, although you probably do need planning permission for Bring sites. What I was suggesting was a fully blown recycling centre. We would definitely need planning permission for that, and we would definitely need NRW permitting for that as well. So it wasn't a suggestion that we couldn't have small skips or small bins like you used to get at the supermarkets. We could probably do something with that, but those would only be taking the material that people can currently put out for a curbside collection. So we would rather push people to put it out as a curbside collection because it does create issues with fly tipping. Across the board, Bring sites attract fly tipping because people turn up with materials that you can't recycle there and leave them at the side of the bin. So hopefully I've covered off the councillor's questions.
Thank you, Carl. Councillor Powell, do you want to come in with your questions now?
Yeah. Yes. I think I can't get my camera turned. No, that's it. Oh, it keeps doing it. Never mind. You can hear me, can you?
We can hear you. We just can't see you.
Don't worry about the picture. It doesn't matter. Just 2 points. One, I want to support everything that Councillor Smith said. I think that was really up to the point. My main concern isn't to stop anything or to do anything different, but is having a waste facility site in the edge of a car park, to me, does not feel right nor safe. People come into the car park to park and go and do their shopping, and they have children with them, as well as all the elderlies. And if you're going to have lorries going through, I know it's only going to be once every so often to unload, and people coming in with trailers and things to take in waste, it's not really a safe environment. And to me, it would be better if they did have something like a Bring site and not have the facility as it is now. I know that it's difficult to find anywhere where you could put it on the outskirts of town, but I do feel it is not a very good thing health and safety wise to have it in a car park, which is really supposed to be for shoppers. And the other thing I want to say is I think we have very near as many elderly people in Abergavenny, and I find that most, myself, I think we might go to the recycling place a couple of times a year when we cut a lot of shrubs in the garden, and that is all. We find that we can recycle all the things we need to, plastics, tins, papers and everything like that. And I think if they can really encourage that more, it'd be safer for people, because as they said, a lot of elderly people don't drive. Well, surely it's much safer for them to have it at the curbside. So but the only answer I can say to it is not to have the facility as it is now, but just possibly to have bin collections as they do in a couple of the car parks in Abergavenny, where people can take things. I know it gets abused sometimes, but that would solve some of the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Are there any more questions that members wish to ask?
Yes, please, Chairman.
Is that Councillor Clark?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Peter Clark, a member for Langibby. My ward actually pretty well encircles Usk, and some parts of my ward are actually closer to the centre of Usk than Usk outlying people are. I thought that Alison's presentation was very good this afternoon. It was very understandable, and one can completely understand the arguments that the people in Usk are putting forward. And similarly, Carl's responses were equally good. One or two of the maths problems confused me. £30,000 as an expected cost to put the plant right in Usk is actually a capital item, and therefore is not actually costed in 1 year, but spread over the number of years that it's depreciated over. So it could actually be as little as £5,000 if you spread it over 6 years. Secondly, Jamie's question, he asked, was the £40,000 cost this year's, and was told it was, and every future year. Well, we're already halfway through the year, so the saving would actually only be £20,000 in the current year if it was closed immediately. So we're actually only talking about £25,000 as a total cost. Now, we're an authority, and I've been on it 30 odd years, who are going to spend £150 million this year, despite COVID. And I don't think it should be beyond our wit somehow to find that £25,000 this year and 45 next year to continue with this service in Usk. They are elderly, a lot of them don't have cars, and it's all right talking about only 10 miles to the tip. It's a damn long way on a bus with a load of rubbish if you haven't got a car. So can we please use our mathematical minds and our practical sense and get this sorted out? We've got time, let it run till the end of the year. If us don't sort themselves out in the meantime, then they would deserve to have it closed. But I think there's enough room and space in all the arguments we've heard today that we could sort this out in the next 6 months. Thank you, Chairman, very much.
Do you want to come back in there?
Yeah, I'll just cover that off. Councillor's right, the £30,000 would be capital money. We could spread it over the years. So yes, in that sense, all I was trying to highlight is it needs to be spent, whether it's spent now or whether it's spent over 5-6 years. That cost is still there. The £40,000 saving was agreed with Viridor, but if that's closed, they would give us a £40,000 saving this year. So that £40,000 is £40,000 this year, and regardless of what point we are in the year. As we get closer to the end of the year, obviously that's going to change, and Viridor are now going to pass those costs back through to us. So that's the reason for a decision being made now. With Usk being so small, we wouldn't suggest that it reopens with COVID currently carrying on. We can't manage the site and manage COVID safety. So I understand what people are saying is give Usk a chance to get better. I wouldn't be suggesting, it certainly wouldn't be a recommendation from officers of the authority to reopen the Usk site with the COVID pandemic going on, because we won't be able to manage the risk on site or the spread of disease. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Carl. I understand Councillor Grocott, you want to come in? Oh no, sorry, Councillor Thomas.
Chair, I do want to come in if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak at your committee. You asked us to introduce ourselves. I'm Martin Grocott, and I'm the councillor for the Lansdowne ward in Abergavenny. My nearest tip is Llanfoist. I joined this afternoon because primarily I was interested in the potential changes to the green waste. But I have to say that listening to the arguments put forward by people in Usk, I really found that quite impressive. And I would fully support the comment made by Councillor Bertruni that I think we ought to find a way forward with the people of Usk here to save their facilities. And, you know, it seems to me that if you're trying to make the argument that Carl Tuig has done this afternoon, that it's actually absolutely fine to travel to places like Llanfoist if you live in Usk, that all is well and good, but of course that assumes that if there is a potential increase in the custom at Landfoist, that there would be more time made available for people to use that facility. The reality, of course, is that elsewhere in this report, it talks about very considerable time reductions at Landfoist and at 5 lanes. So the real motivation here is not to improve the service, it's to cut the service. And until we get assurances that the time of opening at Landfoist and at 5 lanes is not going to be taken through, then I think we're trying to sell a pup to the people in Usk. Yet let us consider inviting them to travel 20 odd miles there and back with their rubbish, but only if you're allowing the time at those places for them to do so, and to invite them to travel that distance while the hours the other tips are being cut does not add up to making much sense to me. I think the people of Usk this afternoon have put forward a very good case for keeping their facilities open. I support Councillor Batruni very much. I think we ought to be looking at that. And Mr. Toohig, the bottom line surely is that you're looking to cut the service, not to improve it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. Councillor Thomas.
Ooh, thanks. I just wanted to come in. I totally support what Councillor Grocott has said. I totally support what Councillor Dimitri said. And to be honest, last week when we had the seminar, I was more sceptical about the Usk site, and I can understand some of the concerns of Mr. Carl Toohig and of the officers. But to be fair, today, I think Usk have made a very strong case. You've got 2,000 people responding. You've had 500 written responses. The town council in Usk is clearly behind this movement to keep that facility in some form. And at the end of the day, if the town council and people of Usk want to perhaps go into almost like a joint venture to, in a sense, subsidise that facility, well, that's up to them. They pay a precept like everybody else does. And if they want to spend it in that way, you do have quite an elderly demographic in Usk, then I have no sort of problem with that. And there is obviously a great deal of goodwill from the people of Usk in terms of keeping that facility. In reality, and I think the Cabinet member said, Councillor Pratt said earlier on about this is a listening exercise, but I hope it is a listening exercise and not a consultation in a sense, just for the sake of it, and the decision is going to be taken, let's cut off Usk as a facility. So I think we need some time, and I support what Councillor Clark said, in terms of it's not a huge amount of money to actually look at it and not to make a decision on the hoof, which appears to be the case. It's shut because of COVID. Well, let's get rid of it completely. So I do think there's some need for some reconsideration. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments and recommendations today. So points to summing up. The reason for the closure of Usk recommended by officers. Low recycling. Sorry?
Sheila wants to speak.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Woodhouse, come in.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you to the officers. I've been listening closely to everything that's been said. My ward is in Abergavenny, but obviously we all know and love Usk, and the residents there are very concerned about this matter. And I just hope that we can find a way forward to assist them. Something that struck me is they are obviously missing this facility. It's something they've got used to. It's on their doorstep, and a lot of the people use it. Perhaps they haven't got adequate storage at home, and it's on their doorstep, and they can pop the things in. They've got used to that facility. I would like to see consideration given to some sort of unmanned facilities. It's been mentioned several times here. whilst this is being looked at and maybe a possible way forward for the future. But certainly I think at the moment, the good people of Esk, I'm sure they could monitor that themselves, that it's not misused. If it is misused, well, that would be very unfortunate. But I do think that that's something that really needs to be given consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhouse. Are there any more questions now before we proceed? No? Okay. So yes, like I was saying, the low recycling waste at Usk is the worst in Wales. We understand that Usk Town Council's view, but the site is not a good site. It's too small, and the health and safety concerns that members have also raised this afternoon are still present. We've analysed the waste composition, and the frequent visits to the site are to dispose of black bag waste that could be recycled at curbside, such as food waste. The community concerns highlighted are with regards to fly tipping concerns. We shouldn't excuse this, and the closure of site shouldn't give the impression it's okay to fly tip. Distance to travel was another concern of both members and the community. To travel into another facility, Chepstow residents travel 7 miles, and they are from a large town. Some residents are travelling 14 miles, so it's a matter of perception. The distance to Landfoist or 5 lanes is 10 miles, and COVID has given us a new lens to analyse waste. So it's not an excuse for the decision, but it's allowed us to analyse usage rates and make the recommendations in this report, which are to close earlier. Response to the Usk Town Council's concern, obviously there are concerns about what will residents use instead, and Carl has clearly said that it will be curbside recycling scheme, reduces unnecessary journey and air pollution. A suggestion to reopen the site during COVID time is not viable. At this moment in time, we cannot ensure the safety of those that work there and those visiting. Distant concerns covered, not hugely different to what other residents are needing to travel. Many other villages around us, such as Goitra and Landfoist, will be closer to the facilities proposed. Fly tipping, we have a problem with fly tipping nationally, but we cannot use this as an excuse not to make the changes. We have all read the letters and petitions, and the themes are very similar, but we have discussed the themes of our responses to them. We have data that evidences the rationale for the option proposed. You will see in the report that we have explored different options, such as whether the site could be externally run, but it's not recommended that this could bring a whole host of problems if the site was managed correctly. When we did the composition analysis in the time point between the consultation exercise and the point where the decision was to put into the abeyance and the situation was worse, with even less recycling being done, we need the curbside recycling rate to improve. We need to reduce the amount of waste we propose, and we need to reduce the journeys being made to dispose of the black bag waste. When we asked the residents' views on whether black bag waste facilities were a key desire for people, and the response that this wasn't, and it wasn't as important to people as we thought. With regards to the members' comments made this afternoon, it has been asked that a self-service be looked at, but Carl has obviously highlighted that it will only accept things that you can recycle at curbside or dispose of, so your general waste. Councillor Batruni has obviously asked us to take into account that Usk Town Council have taken over operations and stepped up to challenging tasks before, and would like us to provide Usk Town Council more time and the opportunity to turn this around. Councillor Howarth, you requested that a residual waste drop-off be allowed for. And another point that Councillor Batruni made was protecting our rural areas and the services, and to continue with the message that the council insist on applying. So I propose now that the committee will now consider a way forward. We have fully discussed the report's implications, and we now need to consider the recommendations outlined in the report under paragraph 2.2, which are to rationalise the service provision of household waste recycling centres through recommendations A and E. A, continuation of the booking system at all sites initially implemented to ensure social distancing, full closure of Usk Household Waste Recycling Centre, introduce revised opening hours of 8 till 4, additional closure of 5 lanes, additional day closure of 5 lanes in Lamfoyce, and commence procurement of the Household Waste Recycling Contact Centre contract based on the revised service model above. I propose we take each in turn, asking for a show of hands if you agree to each recommendation, just to confirm that only strong communities members can vote on these. So this will now show in the chat bar shortly.
Chair, will you be taking recommendations?
Well, it's going to a cabinet decision.
Yeah, for example, the full closure of HWRC, Councillor Clark has suggested a way forward, which is very similar to Councillor Petruni. Can we take that as a recommendation and vote on that?
Give me a moment to just speak to some officers.
I think we've lost Councillor Petrini. His system's gone down, I think.
No, I'm back.
Oh, you okay?
My understanding is that as a committee we can recommend stuff to Cabinet. Yeah. That is indeed our function. Of course, Cabinet could ignore us, but as a committee, we can recommend changes.
So essentially, we could vote against the full
yourself
closure.
Again, I didn't hear that.
Go on.
My understanding, Chair, is that committees can make recommendations, offer comments to reports. They can't change a decision. They can only recommend stuff to the Cabinet. Yeah. The Cabinet can ignore it, but we can recommend. Is that right?
So yeah, that's correct. So we can't vote on Councillor Petruni's recommendation, but those recommendations will be taken forward to the Cabinet.
So we've voted effectively asking to vote against the closure of Usk, against the closure.
Yes. So I think Matt Phillips is going to come in.
Okay.
Matt, would you like to come in?
Councillors, good afternoon. Hello to those watching at home. I'm Matt Phillips. I'm the head of law and monitoring officer. So for those unaware of my involvement, my job to interpret the Constitution and assist the various meetings and what have you that go on. It's been a fascinating debate so far, and I really appreciate everyone who's taken part. I've got the Constitution in front of me. I think we're in danger of getting into one of our kind of spirals of recommendations and amendments and votes and what have you. I think the point was raised about making recommendations. So the specific functions of the Select Committee are with a view to assisting Council and Cabinet, principally in scrutinising the Executive, conducting research, questioning members of Cabinet and officers, and obviously that's the point of Carl being with you today, liaising with external organisations and considering the impact of policies. I think the depth and breadth of the conversation today has absolutely achieved those aims. I think if we start getting into the space of trying to vote on the individual recommendations of a report that's going to go through to Cabinet, we run the risk of not fully articulating the entirety of a debate that's gone on for 2.5 hours. The thing I'm most interested in is the nuance and the breadth of that debate is understood at Cabinet. So I was reassured to hear the Cabinet member for these matters, Councillor Pratt, speak up earlier and make the point that she's been fully engaged in what's been said this afternoon. So my recommendation, Chair, and it's a matter for you, it's your meeting, is that probably not to get into an attempt to vote on each of the matters. And probably try and take the entirety, as you summed up at the end of the meeting, and have that captured correctly in the minutes and have that then taken into Cabinet so it can form part of their debate and their decision-making process.
Chair, we haven't discussed items C, D and E. So how can we make a decision on the whole aspect if we haven't spoken about C, D and E?
Well, you've had an opportunity to speak. If you wish to make comments or recommendations.
Okay, I understand that, Lisa, but we were talking fully about the full closure of SHRWC. We've now concluded that. We haven't gone on to talk about the opening hours at the other sites, which maybe I agree or disagree. We haven't spoken about the additional closure of 5 lanes, and obviously the committee procurement, the HWC contract will obviously go ahead. But I don't believe that we followed the Constitution in following these 5 points without discussing them. They may be nodded through, but before we get to talk about 2.2, we've got to talk about all the bits and pieces in it. So I find that Mr. Phillips's comments, whilst I understand them, I don't think it covers C, D and E.
Okay.
I don't know anybody else agree with me or disagree?
About the other proposals, we did discuss them. If you'd like to make some comments, I'll allow that. If
okay. Right. In terms of item C, I have no problem with introducing the hours of 8 till 4, but I would like this to be reassessed in April next year when we come to the summer period. Regarding the additional day closure at 5 lanes and Landfoist, I personally don't have a problem with that, and I think it should be assessed in the light of where we are in the future. And as far as item E is concerned, that will go ahead in my view. That's where I stand on the 5 points.
Okay, so you'd like that to be reassessed in April with regards to the opening hours and the additional day closure?
Yeah, as we look into have a reassessment of B, which Councillor Clark has brought up. I think we as long as Cabinet take note of the comments we're making today without recommendations, that's fine. But as long as they take note of what we're saying, that is, and Councillor Pratt has indicated that, so I take that as read. I'll leave it to you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone wish to?
I'm sorry I've been hard.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We had covered it, and so had Carl.
I think that Councillor Webb has just said something on that as well about agreeing with me.
Councillor Webb, do you wish to speak?
Please.
Or make comment?
No, I don't wish to speak actually, but I totally agree with Councillor Easton that we didn't debate the other items on the agenda, but I agree with what he has said in relation to those items. Thank you.
Okay, one moment. I'm going to ask Carl to come back in.
He died.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I've asked Carl to come back in and just go over what he's already said with regards to the revised opening hours and the additional day closure at the 5 lanes and Landfoist sites, just so we can ensure that members are happy that they've had an opportunity to speak. So who would like to go? Who would like to ask a question first after Carl? Well, I'll let you go, Carl.
So within the report, there was introduced the revised opening hours. Hopefully we've covered that off in the report. There is a big reduction in usage at the sites. We have more data at our fingertips now than we've ever had, and we know that we have capacity at them sites to manage a reduced amount of hours. So that's what the recommendation is setting out. The additional closures at 5 lanes and Landfoist, through the booking system, when you book now, if there isn't a slot for 5 o'clock or there isn't a slot for a Thursday or a Wednesday or whatever day it is, you just move to the next available slot. People are not seeing it in the same way as they used to, where access was just, you created rubbish and you took it to the site whenever you wanted to. People are following the booking system is working well. We're getting a lot of positive comments about it, and the booking system lends itself to looking at these revised hours. The savings are substantial in staffing terms if we reduce the hours and the days on the site. So I hope the report covered it off. I understand that the main conversation around the Ask site was, or the main of the conversation was around the Ask site today, but I'm more than happy to answer questions on the other points, recommendations as well.
It's fine by me, Chair.
Andy, Chair.
You muted, Lise.
I know, sorry. Would any members like to ask questions in relation to this just before we move forward? No? Okay, so I propose we take each in turn, asking for a show of hands if you agree with each recommendation, just to confirm that only Strong Communities members can vote, and obviously your recommendations have been raised, and obviously our cabinet member, Councillor Pratt, is here and listening to your views. So in the chat bar, you'll see the voting facility.
Has Councillor Devi got problems with his chat bar, please, Chairman?
Councillor Devi, can you turn your mic on, please? Councillor Devi, you're still on mute. We just want to know if your chat bar's working, because if not, we'll take.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you see your chat bar to the right-hand side?
Yeah. Is that the one with all the dots on?
That's it. No, in the chat. So on your toolbar, there's like a speech bubble. It's the third from the right.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Okay, can I take yours? With regards to the continuation of the booking system on all sites initially implemented to ensure social distancing, are you happy for it to continue, against, or wish to abstain?
I would prefer to continue.
Okay. If you keep your mic on, Councillor Devi, because I'll do that on each item. Okay, we've had 5 responses. 6, obviously, including Councillor Devi.
It's okay then.
One moment, my computer's saying it's low battery and it's charging. Oh, the joys of technology. Okay, we'll move on to, sorry.
I was just saying, could I apologise for coming in late? I could get to you, but you couldn't hear me, for whatever the reason.
Okay. All right, now we'll do the next vote, which is full closure of Usk Recycling Centre.
Is that me?
Devi, do you want to voice, or do you want to message Democratic Services? It's up to you.
I think it should be reviewed. I don't want it closed yet. I think it should be reviewed. There are other options, as Ms. Councillor Clark said.
Okay, so you against?
We got to vote against it then.
I'm voting against it at this time. Yeah.
So it can be. Yeah. How many of the committee here today, Lise?
I do believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Could we take a vote? Well, we got 3 and 3 then. All right, okay. It's up to you.
And can we record Councillor Devi as an against? And then can we move?
So what are we doing about that, Chair? 3 and 3.
Well, it doesn't include Councillor Devi's, which was against.
So So it's for, how many members of the committee here?
We've got, let me open up the attendance.
There's something wrong here.
Someone didn't vote in the first one.
Yeah, yeah.
Jamie, are you still on?
Yeah.
Okay. We're only going to be showing the cabinet member anyway.
Yes, I have voted twice, Chair, and I need
Okay,
to leave
thank
shortly.
you.
Sorry, I'm afraid.
Okay, so we'll move on to introducing the revised opening hours of 8 till 4. If you could all submit your vote now.
That's a good idea, that.
Straight in.
Okay. And then the additional day closure at 5 Lanes and Lamfoyce, that will appear shortly. Councillor Devi?
Would you repeat what you want from me?
Can you confirm if you're for, against or wish to abstain on the additional day closure at 5 Lanes and Lamfoyce?
I'd like to abstain on that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one is commence procurement for the household waste recycling contract based on the revised service model for the above. For, against and abstain. Can you confirm?
Can I make a comment before I vote, Chair?
Yeah.
We had a 3-on-3 decision on the full closure HWRC, so the decision of the recommendation from the committee is neither is 50-50. So on commencement of procurement, I don't believe that procurement I can't get there. The commenced procurement can continue unless we resolve the position of SHWRC. So I'm going to abstain on that.
Okay. Matt, do you want to come in there to advise members?
Hello, Chair. Yeah. As I was saying before, it's a matter for you how you want to record the kind of totality of the debate that's happened today. The select committee is not a decision-making body, so I think the important thing is the kind of detail and the nuance, and the point that Councillor Eason's made towards the end as well are all captured. The kind of strictness of capturing the vote, needing a deciding vote and what have you, I don't think is crucial in this matter, because the point is that it's conveyed to cabinet and that they're made aware of the entirety of the debate today. So it's not a matter that I feel I need to kind of strongly steer you one way or another. I think it's the totality of it which is important.
Thank you for clearing that up, Matt.
All right.
Okay.
I didn't actually vote wrong, it doesn't matter. I voted wrong there, it doesn't matter. It's 5-1, so.
Okay. I'd now like to move on to the second report, which is item 5 on the agenda, which is the garden waste collection service, beginning with the second part of the public open forum. Carl, can you present us with the evidence you've received through the public open forum on the garden waste collection?
Please no change then. My voice is small now, so she's going to take this report.
Just a second, because we're going to play the videos. Can I just check, are members okay to continue, or do we want to take a break?
I'm going to have to leave, Chair, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Fine. We're going to play the videos.
Hi, I'm Sam Rogers, a resident in Bulwark. I would recommend sticking with the reusable bags for garden waste for 2 reasons. One is convenience and the other is environmental impact. So first of all, convenience. Lots of residents don't have space to store a large wheelie bin, whereas it's much easier to store a reusable bag. There's also the question for lots of residents of moving waste between the back garden and the front of their house if they don't have clear access. So a reusable bag can be moved through your house if you need to be collected from the front, whereas a wheelie bin obviously can't. So altogether, a wheelie bin is less convenient for residents. Second, environmental impact. Obviously, there's the carbon footprint to consider with rolling out the wheelie bins across the whole county. But there's also the ongoing issue that plastic wheelie bins often break, which I've experienced from living elsewhere. The lids often break off when waste is being collected, and therefore the council has to keep replacing the bins with new bins, which only adds to the amount of plastic waste and the carbon that it takes to produce these items. So those are my 2 reasons why I would recommend sticking with the existing system. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Kay Blackwell and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my husband Jim. We live in my square. Now the majority of Monmouthshire gardens are not flat. They have slopes, steps, banks, and are totally unsuited for a wheelie bin. Hessian bags, on the other hand, can accompany the gardener wherever he or she may be, whether it's on a rockery, under hedges, or on slopes. Wheelie bins can't. We don't want wheelie bins. Hessian bags, when not being used, can be folded and stored flat out of sight. Wheelie bins are big, ugly, and need to be stored somewhere relatively outside. Don't want them. A full wheelie bin containing 2 weeks' worth of garden refuse is too heavy for older people to manipulate up to the collection point. Not only that, putting bag or whatever of your waste rubbish into the wheelie bin is heavy, and putting it into the top of it is quite dangerous for old people or any others. We don't want wheelie bins. We want Hessian bags collected either weekly or fortnightly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to Laura, who's going to be presenting this report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. I'm going to summarise the report, which hopefully you've all had time to read over the weekend. So, in summary, the report sets out the following recommendations. Number 1, to approve the change of frequency of garden waste collection from weekly to fortnightly. Number 2, to approve the change of container from the 80-litre reusable bag to a 240-litre wheelie bin. And number 3, to consider and approve the charge levied for the future service. So Monmouthshire's current position, our weekly bag service costs us £660,000 to provide. Income generated from the permits that we sell to the public brings in £330,000, which leaves the financial gap of £330,000. The charge we would need to levy in order to fully cover costs based on our current customer base for the current service would be £36.28 per 80 litre bag. For a fortnightly wheel bin, £29.62 per bin. Just questions we need to raise and answer. So in the current financial climate and waste with huge budget pressures, do Monmouthshire County Council want to continue to subsidise the service? Do we need fully or partly close the financial gap? And how much of it are residents willing to pay to protect the service? We looked at 4 options which are cited within the report. We looked at the continuing the service as it is. We looked at a fortnightly reusable bag service, and then we looked at both a weekly and fortnightly bin service. 2 options were taken forward for further investigation, which were the weekly bag service, so stay as we are, and the fortnightly bin service. We did look at fortnightly bag service, but unfortunately we've discounted this down to manual handling grounds. Our collection crews would literally have double the amount of bags placed out for collection. We feel this would be unacceptable. And also the weekly bin service was discounted due to being an expensive option. In terms of the charge we levy as well for the future service, whichever option we go with, we just need to also, there's something in the report that points out, do we need to charge an additional fee to offset loss of custom? We've proposed 15%, taking the charge for reusable bags to £42.68 and fortnightly bins to £34.84. Year on year, we've slightly increased the cost of our reusable bags, and every year we see a drop off in customers due to the increased charges. So we have to consider this as a risk when we decide whichever option we want, whichever cost we go, we'd like to levy for each option. So the recommendation is from officers for a fortnightly wheelie bin, and the reasons are fortnightly wheel bin service would cost us less to provide. Based on our current customer base, we're talking about £500,000 in comparison to the current 660. This means we could afford to charge our customers less if we wanted to cover costs, and this lower price increase would mean less risk to the percentage of customer drop-off. A fortnightly wheel bin represents better value for money for the customer. The total capacity of the 240 litre bin is 3 times that of a bag. If you take a weekly comparison, a bag is 80 litres, where a wheel bin gives an equivalent of 120 litres per week, so it's 1.5 times capacity if you put it on a weekly comparable basis. Our neighbouring authorities, the Forest of Dean, Gloucestershire, Powys, Torvine, Newport, all use fortnightly wheel bins. Most of them charge, and the charge ranges from between £30 to £44. Wheel bins are recognised best practice for garden waste due to it being a heavy waste stream. HSE recommend using them if at all possible. Monmouthshire County Council as employer have a duty to our employees to reduce manual handling and any associated risk of injury. The crews picking up hundreds of bags per day, per round. The wheelie bins will vastly mitigate that. Also, the environmental impact, we currently replace around 12,000 bags every year, with 17,000 permits being sold, extremely high replacement rate, whereas we would expect the life of a wheelie bin to be up to 10 years. The wheelie bins can be manufactured from 90% recycled material, whereas our Hessian bags are not. And also the wheelie bins can be manufactured within the UK, whereas unfortunately the Hessian bags are not. To note, we would work with our residents who are unable to manage or house a bin. Options we could offer are an assisted collection, or we're also proposing the equivalent literage in our current reusable bags, so 3 per fortnight, to those residents who will struggle with a wheelie bin or really do not have any storage. We would agree these on a case-by-case basis. It would not be something the public would be able to choose between. Information from other authorities suggests that the numbers of people we'd have to offer alternative via assisted collections or the reusable bags would be relatively low, in the low hundreds, although we do recognise that Monmouthshire's got an older population, but we can mitigate against all of that. I'd just like to share with you, because it wasn't included in the report, the public consultation results. We went out for a 2-week consultation recently with 5 questions, and I'm just going to go 6,112 responses. Over 1,000 responses came within the first hour of the survey being made live. The first question we asked was were they a existing garden waste customer? 90% of the respondents said they were, 10% said they weren't. The aim of this survey was to try and gauge how much the public would be prepared to pay in order to protect our service. The second question was, the current service using the 80-litre reusable bags costs the authority just over £36 per permit to provide. The cost set to increase year on year. What is the maximum amount you would pay per permit to continue to use the current service? And I'll just come on to the third question then, which would be identified if the council were to change the way they deliver the service by means of a 240 fortnightly wheelie bin. The costs of the service provision would decrease, and a wheel bin service of this nature, based on our current customer numbers, would cost the council around £30 to deliver. So we asked them again, what is the maximum amount you would pay to per bin to use the service? It's a shame I can't show you the slides because it looks better in graphical form, but if I just explain to you what happened. So it's fair to say both options, most people wanted to pay either the current charge or within the £20 to £25 bracket. For the reusable bags, this was 82% of people wanted to pay the current charge or £20 to £25 maximum, leaving just 18% of respondents saying they'd be prepared to pay £25 and above. For the wheelie bins, we have 64.5% of people said they would pay either the current charge of £18 or up to £25, leaving 35.5% of people saying the maximum they would pay is between the £25 up to the £45 bracket. On comparison of this data, it does indicate that were we to introduce a fortnightly bin service, the public may be prepared to pay more, and we may find it a better way to change the funding gap. It becomes more feasible, the fortnightly bin collection. We then asked the question, of the 2 options outlined, so weekly reusable bag and fortnightly bin, which option would you prefer? Results came in at 54% of people would prefer a fortnightly wheelie bin, with 46% of people preferring a weekly reusable bag. And then we asked for reasons for their preference, which I've grouped, and I'll read out the main reasons given. So when people indicated they preferred bags, the main reasons given was because they wanted a weekly collection. Number 2 was lack of storage. Number 3, bags easier to use. Number 4, bags easier to move. Number 5, they didn't want to pay more than £18. Other various reasons were cited, but they were the top 5. Top 5 preference towards bins was number 1, people felt they were easier to use. 865 respondents on that one. 689 understood the value for money, so that was the second reason, preferring towards bins. And third, people were happy actually with a fortnightly collection. Number 4, neater, tidier, or they don't blow away. And number 5, easier to move and manage. Just of note maybe is that of the 10% of our of respondents who aren't currently our customers, 74% of them indicated that they would prefer a wheelie bin, which may indicate that we could get some additional custom there. Okay, so I've gone through the report, and now I'd like to address the videos and some of the comments we had through from our public. So as well as the videos we've just seen, we've had over 30 written comments in from members of the public. I'm not going to read them all out individually, but I've grouped them all into themes. I'll read out each one and address the points. Okay. So the first grouping I've put in, that bins are an eyesore. People weren't happy with street scene and they block pavements. I think we all have to obviously understand wheelie bins is a change, and it's obviously 54% of our public potentially will be happy with, and 46% preferred the bags. But only 25. We have to remember that 25% of our households are currently customers. This means that there won't be wheelie bins outside every property on every street. If the decision was to go for fortnightly wheelie bins on rollout, we'd do some really good communications and reminding the public to place out and return in a timely manner. And our crews, of course, would be trained, fully trained in new procedures, and we'd ensure that they're put back neatly out of the way as far as possible. The second grouping I've got is, so people were concerned with capacity. Some with a limited capacity, some were saying the bins were too big. So in terms of the limited capacity, I think some of the public understood that they could only have one bin. So they were concerned that they wouldn't have enough capacity, but actually they would be able to buy multiple bins, so could buy as many as they would require. Other people said they didn't need that much capacity. As I said earlier, essentially the bins are 1.5 times when you can the bag capacity when you compare it on a week-by-week basis. So although bigger, they're not, it's not a huge increase. Another concern raised was about uneven sloped ground or gravel drive and steps at properties. Monmouthshire aren't unique. Our neighbouring authorities most of them run fortnightly wheel bin services, and many have this type of topography. A lot of the public within their comments talked about wheeling a bin round the garden with them whilst gardening, which isn't something, obviously they can do that if they wish, but it isn't something you really expect them to do. The garden bin would be placed at somewhere on the property and then they could decant into it. Of course, they have their existing bags which they could use. Unfortunately, it is more difficult to wheel a bin over gravel. It's difficult to account for all scenarios, and the steps are the same. If there was any, as I've said, we can mitigate against anyone who really is having difficulties by providing them an alternative. Some of the comments was they want fortnightly bags instead. As I've already mentioned, we investigated this option, but the massive increase in manual handling we didn't feel was acceptable for our crews. Also, the costs would be similar to that of delivering a fortnightly wheelie bin, so costs would still significantly increase. Some of the public cited that wheelie bins are difficult to move around and concerned about the height and the weight of a bin. So wheelie bins are counterbalanced and designed with ergonomics in mind. So when they're tipped, they balance out, so they hopefully shouldn't cause too many issues. So someone talked about the bulk density of garden waste. We've investigated this and we've talked to neighbouring authorities, and we're looking at probably a wheelie bin weighing about 30 kilos rather than the cited 150, I think it was, within one of the comments. And again, we can mitigate for people who can't manage through assisted collections or the bag alternative. If anyone really is struggling, the wheelie bin is a metre high, and the base measures almost exactly the same as a garden waste bag. So in terms of size and space, it shouldn't take much more up in terms of footprint. Another issue that people raised was they lived in terraced houses or would have problems with storage. We've already looked into this. We don't have a massive amount of terraced houses in properties in Monmouthshire, but we recognise that there are some. If a property does not have any storage, then we can offer them the equivalent literage of bags. Comments were that wheelie bins get dirty. It's difficult, isn't it? Because they get as dirty as the reusable bags would, depend, you know, if you're putting the same materials in, and I'd argue that probably a wheelie bin is easier to clean, being hard plastics. Some of the public were concerned that a sharp increase in costs would mean we'd lose custom. I'd agree with this and acknowledge this is a risk, hence the discussion around the charge today and the reason for us putting out the public survey to try and gauge where people, what the maximum people may wish to pay. Comments were raised on the cost of the bins, so the initial capital outlay. So the wheelie bins we've been looking at, they start at about £15 each, and we'd expect them to probably last around 10 years. The comment the gentleman made on the video about replacements and lids, we've talked to neighbouring authorities, particularly Torvine we work quite closely with, and I've talked to them about their replacement rates and their lids, and they say they replace very few. They didn't have data, but it's not a big issue for them. When you look at a bin costing us £15, potentially lasting 10 years, just our bags, we currently replace 70% of our bags each year. With the cost of the pouch and the permit, this would cost us over £24 over the 10 years. So actually over the 10 years, the bags they look like they'd be more expensive. Another comment raised was that they didn't want fortnightly waste hanging around. Again, we've talked to lots of our neighbouring authorities who already have this service. They don't generally have problems with the garden waste smelling. Authorities that do shut down for the winter, when the public use the bins for winter storage, when the collections open back up in March, that's the time where they do have a little bit of an issue, but actually through the summer and that they said they don't have any issues. A couple of members of our team actually have fortnightly garden waste bins and they haven't ever experienced any issues. Also, the Welsh Government blueprint recommends fortnightly garden waste collections, so we don't believe there's going to be an issue around that. And I think the last issue raised was again an increase in fly tipping. If we went to bins and restricted waste, they think that fly tipping would increase, or if we increase costs, they think fly tipping would increase. Carl's talked around fly tipping quite a lot earlier, so for all of those reasons, whenever we introduce a new initiative within waste, fly tipping is always cited as a big reason not to do something, or a big major concern that it's going to increase. But actually, with most of the initiatives we've ever implemented within waste, there's been very little evidence of fly tipping increase. I've also talked to local authorities. They haven't seen any increased fly tipping with the introduction of bins. We still do have disposal open at our HWRCs, and as Carl's talked through, there's plenty of capacity for bookings there. So if the public really not happy with paying for garden waste, a lot of people, our public don't, they can carry on to continue to dispose of it there. Yes, and it was just about that expectation that increased fly tipping will occur with all changes, but actually in reality, often there's no significant increase. I think I've addressed all the points that were raised there, so happy to open up for any other questions.
Thank you for that, Laura. I'll hand over to members shortly. I just want to advise that the submitted comments that have been read and passed to members, Laura has responded to them in her report. So now I will ask you to put your hand up in the chat bar if you wish to speak on this item. I know I had Councillor Petrini who wanted to go first, so please go first.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of comments. First thing I want to say is nothing against moving to a fortnightly collection.
From you. You're on mute.
Well,
Dimitri,
to my
you're frozen. I'm going to let Councillor Eason go next, and I'm going to ask you to come back in. We can't hear you, and your picture keeps freezing. You want to try now, Dimitri?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, go.
Yes, fine.
I wasn't on mute, but okay. This system, God bless it. I'm nothing against fortnightly collections. That makes complete sense to me. But then, have I worked this out right? A 94% increase in the charge is hugely excessive, from £18 to £35. If I've got my figures right, that is extraordinary increase to give to residents. Also, because I think the officer noted that every time they increased the charge incrementally over the previous years, they saw a corresponding drop off in customers and clients for that service. So what kind of drop off do you anticipate with a 94% increase, given the recession we're in and it's going to get worse? Are we deliberately trying to cut off this service? Because no business plan in their right mind would increase it that much and expect a good take up. But there we go. I would look forward to the response on that. I also know in the report, and I'm quoting the report directly here, that many authorities use the recycling service and keep it free, including wheelie bins, because to keep their recycling targets high, i.e. to keep achieving their recycling targets. So therefore they heavily subsidise them so they can hit those targets. Given the previous item where basically USC was being labelled as the kind of bad boy or bad girl of Monmouthshire, and that they were responsible for us not hitting our targets, do you think increasing it by 94% helps us in that endeavour? Have I frozen again? I can see my face freezing. Hopefully that probably in a bad pose. And I believe that's disproportionate, Chair. We're going to reduce our recycling targets, given that Torvine and Newport have a wheelie bin system and they charge nothing to their residents, nothing. And we're going to charge £35. And they do that to keep their recycling targets high, and we already suffer with our recycling targets. That doesn't seem logical, coherent at all, given our predicament. Is the cabinet member in charge of this? Has she got a grip on this? Doesn't look it. We talked about crews and heavy manual, and I have major concerns about that. But I looked at consultees, and we haven't consulted the union or the unions, have we? And is it just an omission? Or we haven't, and therefore how we know, is it just anecdotal information? I would just look forward for more clarity on that, because it is a serious issue and we need to have a good grasp on it, but I'm sure the unions would have been consulted. The other question I have is why now? We've gone through several phases of changes, different coloured bags, different timings. And each time it was around saving money, making the system more efficient, more understandable. Why didn't we implement the wheelie bin system before, given that our neighbours already had done it? Why didn't we do that before? Why now? Why suddenly the kind of, oh, actually, we need a wheelie bin system and we're going to increase it by 94%, despite our neighbours having 0%? Thank you, Chair.
Laura, do you want to come in? And I know Councillor Pratt would also like to come in after you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the increase in charge, so obviously we've highlighted there's a funding gap. We've worked out what we would need to charge to fully close that gap. But the recommendation for today is to consider and approve the charge levied. From today, we're hoping through Select, informed by the public consultation, that an idea of a charge to take to Cabinet next week will be agreed. The report is not saying we are recommending to charge the full cost. I know that is some people's view, but that is what. So we are asking Select to make a recommendation on that for us. Yes, councils do heavily subsidise garden waste collections. Some councils are in the situation where, without fully subsidising their garden waste collections, they would fail their recycling targets. Monmouthshire isn't quite in that position, although we know last year we were very close to hitting the 65%. It is a concern, so 8% of our garden waste is collected through curbside. We do believe that if the customer did drop off, this garden waste would still go, most of this garden waste would still be presented at our HWC, so we still would have it within our recycling rates, but through a different means. So yeah, our operations manager is in close contact with the unions and have discussed matters. And why now? Operationally, for some time, from the collection crew's point of view, we talked a lot about moving over to wheelie bins for the manual handling issues. There's been a recent HR report which cites musculoskeletal injuries as the highest form of sickness, and crews having time off. Why now? We need to procure vehicles. We've got 12 plate vehicles, so 2012 vehicles. They already should really have been replaced. We urgently need to replace them for next year because we are encountering a lot of problems. So that is an urgent exercise we need to carry out. If we start hiring in vehicles, they're very expensive and bring in additional cost. Why now? Waste are facing massive in-year budget pressures. So we're asked to look at what we can do to try and relieve some of that. So that's why we've brought the fortnightly proposal to Select today.
Councillor Petrini and Sand, do you want to come back in there?
Yeah, Officer Carter, the reason why I say 94%, and you said correct me if I'm wrong, you said that we're looking for Cabinet to increase the charge, not recommend a particular cost. The reason why I thought that was the case, because in Appendix 4, it says Monmouthshire proposed change and cost. So that is the officer's proposed change and cost, and it says £35. So if that's not your intention, it needs to be made more explicitly clear that's not the intention. But that is still a 94% increase. And I don't know if I detected an answer to some of my questions. One is, what's the drop off you expect with a 94% increase? Okay, or even if it's not as high as that, 80%, 50%, 60%, 40% increase. Have you done that work? And what are the implications of that? I basically it's about cost pressure, and that's fair enough, and I think that was your latter point, and I think that's the real reason. And as long as we're just clear about that, I don't mind that being the reason, but to suggest otherwise, or there's other reasons, it just feels slightly disingenuous. If we need to save the money, then we need to save the money. But I just worry that you talk about skeletal injuries, and please send us that. Have we seen that HR report? If I've missed it, I apologise. But has the committee seen that, Chair? And if we haven't, can we see that, Chair? That would be really interesting. And it's your report. There's no consultees. It doesn't say unions. So if they have been consulted, can you just make sure that report reflects that? And what the unions actually said. I don't think you actually reported what the union said. And you talked about other councils receiving, they needed the recycling target, they needed heavily subsidised recycling targets. We didn't actually talk about Monmouthshire. Do we need to do the same to hit our recycling targets, given we already have a problem with it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Petrucci. Councillor Pratt, did you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't intending to speak today, but I'm very concerned that the public listening to this are going to get a very untrue picture from Councillor Petrucci's arguments. This that's being proposed is actually going to be the best value going forward, both for our customers and for us as a council to continue with this service, which is actually valued by a lot of our residents. But we have to remember, this is not a statutory service. It isn't something that we have to do, and we have to think about how much we want to subsidise this service. Now, lots of our residents don't even use this service, and does Councillor Petrucci feel, is he comfortable with people subsidising this service who don't even use it? Lots of our residents don't have gardens. I have a garden which is very small, it's a terraced house, and I can't use a bag or a bin. So, you know, we've got to think about that too. And we are getting through 12,000 bags a year. Now, we have declared a climate emergency, and we've got to think about ways that we can reduce this waste. We've already been told that these bins have been made with 95% recycled plastic. They're produced in the UK. The Hessian bags are brought in from abroad, and they're not as sustainable. So we've got lots of things to consider here. Of course, we can make this a free service, Councillor Petrucci. If you're comfortable with that and you're happy to pay for it and you want to make that recommendation to Cabinet, then, you know, it will be at the cost of another service that we have to cut. You're as aware as all of us are about the challenges we're facing this year. So really, those are the main points I'd like to make. In many cases, this system is going to offer better value, and I think a lot of our customers will still be paying under £1 a week for this service. So thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Can I ask Councillor Eason to come in next?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for your report. You mentioned in your report an Abergavenny company taking the garden waste. Do they pay for that, or do we pass it on free? That's the one question. And Dimitri also, Councillor Petrucci also mentioned the fact of there hasn't been any knowledge of discussions with the trade unions about this. And within your report, it suggests there could be redundancies on this on the basis of your plans. Or redeployment, as you use. So where would they be redeployed? Have those negotiations or discussions taken place, and are they ongoing? The main rationale for changing now, as far as I understand, is you need to change the new vehicles, and if you decide to stay as we are, you will just have new vehicles for the present circumstances. Yet you want to look at the future if we do go to wheelie bins, which I can understand the rationale. I don't understand the rationale of the 2 weekly collections, because I asked this question some years ago about the collection of glass bottles and plastics and cans, and I was told it was not feasible to have a 2 weekly collection of these materials because there'd be too much weight on the lorries for one collection. We'd have to make so many trips to the tip, and this really says the same thing. We're going to put twice as much in a lorry as we would over a week. So the same argument about overloading vehicles might apply. So I come to the view that I personally couldn't handle a 240 or whatever size wheelie bin, just beyond my capacity. But have you considered 120 litre wheelie bins, which they got in Powys, and they charge £30 for them? Yes, it might cost more, and that would be a decision that people have to make, whether they will follow it through. You mentioned the word assisted collection with a vague case-by-case scenario. I'd like to know what that case-by-case is. Would I, for example, qualify for it? And you also mentioned that these bins would be easier to clean than SEN bags. Certainly not, as far as I'm concerned. You'd be dipping your head into a wheelie bin to clean the refuse at the bottom, whereas with an SEN bag, you can do it quite clearly and scrape them clean. Councillor Pratt just mentioned, do we want to pay more? I think life is that we're going to pay more for lots of things. But she also says, what should people who don't use this service pay for it? People who have children who go to schools and people who don't have children, they still pay for the schools. So the corollary doesn't really add up there. That's really all I've got to say, because I think Councillor Petruni said most of it. I just wonder if you could answer those few points there, particularly the Abergavenny company. If they're paying for this, could they do the job? Could we subcontract? Or that's just a bit of a brainstorm. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Laura, would you like to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so Abergavenny garden waste compost. They've got the contract to compost all of Monmouthshire's garden waste. We pay them to compost it. There's no income back from them, so we're in a contract and we pay them X amount per tonne to compost that for us. So a move to fortnightly wheelie bins would mean that one vehicle and one crew that currently collect garden waste would be redeployed. Next year, we're introducing reusable red and purple bags, which need additional crew members. So our loaders are employed as loaders, whether they load garden waste, refuse or recycling. So they would simply shift onto a different round. Your query on procurement and vehicles. Yes, so we need to procure now for whichever way we decide. The vehicles need to be procured urgently to meet timescales. So if we stuck with reusable bags, we procure vehicles very similar to what we've got now. If the decision was made to go to fortnightly bins, we would need to know, because we need to procure specialist lifts to go on the back of those vehicles, which makes the collections quicker and more efficient. The comment about weight on vehicles. So moving to fortnightly garden waste collection. So the weight would be comparable to the rounds now. The round size would be reduced, as we know we'd be taking on more capacity per household, if that makes sense. 120 litre wheel bins. I was having a conversation with Torvine this morning, actually, because that's what they offer for their public that can't manage a 240 litre wheelie bin, whereas we've proposed a reusable bag. They offer a 120 wheelie bin. It's something that we could potentially look at, but the collection charge would have to remain the same as a 240 litre to make our proposal work financially. So an assisted collection, how do you qualify? So if someone applies for an assisted collection, one of our waste education team will either do have a phone call or a visit in person to assess various criteria. There's criteria laid out, such as does whoever's applying have live with someone else who's able to put the bins out for them? How far do our crews have to travel to make the assisted collection? There's all various different criteria like that, which they'll use to assess whether someone or not is granted an assisted collection. And I guess the cleaning of the bins and the bags, it's a difficult one, isn't it? That you know, you can clean both. If people can't manage a wheelie bin, again, we've said we can mitigate that and offer bags is what I could propose for that.
Can I come back, Chair, just quickly? You mentioned, sorry, I mentioned redeployment. You said that the staff would be redeployed to other collections. So what's the difference in taking purple and blue sacks now compared to the purple and blue Hessian sacks? I don't see any big difference. And I am concerned about your comment about criteria for assessing whether somebody should be able to have assisted collections or not. I think the criteria then becomes you're making individuals responsible for making decisions that may or may not be qualified. Take a look at me. You may think I can do lots of things, but I certainly couldn't move a 240 wheelie bin. So I feel that criteria is a bit of a odd one, quite honestly. Thank you, Lisa. That'll do.
Thank you, Councillor Eason.
I can't turn my system off.
That's okay. Councillor Powell, I understand you've got a question next.
Oops, I'm trying to. Oh, got me now. Yeah, sorry, I jiggled. I only did one hand, not meant to be two. I'm Councillor Powell, Councillor for Castle Ward and Abergavenny. I can go along with having the bins as long as you can assure me that people who live in terrace houses or have steps or difficulties would be allowed to keep their brown bags. If you can assure me that that would happen, as you have been saying, I could go with the bins. Because and I'm a bit concerned about Dimitri's sums. How can £18 becoming £35 be 90%? It's only 50%, but there we are. But then the other thing is, it sounds lovely to give these services free, but Monmouthshire is the worst supplied with money from the Welsh Government of any other council. And it's all right for other councils who have more money provided for them to give things free. But if we gave it free, it would go back on the taxpayer. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't want to have to pay extra council tax for something they didn't have. All right, I know with education that happens, but we can't give things free unless we have a decent supply of money from the Welsh Government. Thank you. Oh, can you answer the question about whether you can assure me that if we had the wheelie bins, that the people will definitely get brown bags? Thank you.
Laura, just want to...
Yeah, so yes, Councillor Powell, if members of the public live within a terraced property and there's no storage, we have said we will offer them the alternative, the equivalent literage of reusable bags.
Okay,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Are any more members wanting to ask questions?
Yes, please, Lisa.
Councillor Woodhouse, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm not a member of Strong Communities, but this particular subject is one I want to talk about because I'm the member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny, Laura, and I've probably got about 95% of terrace properties in my ward because they're narrow streets. It's interesting to hear Councillor Powell ask for a reassurance that people can have the bags. What I would like to see is this opportunity for people to have the bags and not have to go through a sort of vetting process. Give people choice, because quite honestly, I could sit here and I could give you a whole list of problems that people are going to find with using wheelie bins. A lot of these properties don't even have a side access. They'd have to bring a wheelie bin through their home after being stored in the garden. If they have got storage, you refer to not having storage, but if people have got storage, it's going to be quite dirty after being, the winter spent in the garden. You've then got the street scene, these narrow streets that I'm referring to have got cars parked, sometimes wholly on the pavement, sometimes partly. You have to squeeze through. Very often the brown bag is pushed to one side when it's emptied. You can do that, obviously. Once it's emptied, you can push it to one side to clear obstacles, but when the brown bags are full and waiting for collection, they are obstacles for people with wheelchairs or mobility scooters. And I've got a couple of safe routes to school. You say these bins are 1 metre high, so school children would have to squeeze past the cars and the bins. So all I'm asking is that for these types of streets, that bags are made available, but readily available. Don't, you know, otherwise people are going to have these bins and then they're going to encounter all of these problems. I can just see it now, because I regularly move food bins and brown bags when I walk through these streets to prevent them becoming obstacles, more particularly when they're empty. But these wheelie bins could be left out all day while people are working. I'm also concerned that people who have one bag, we're going to lose them. They're going to drop off because they're going to have to pay £35 for a bin, whereas if they only need one bag, they've got a small garden, they're not, the capacity is not going to be required, and the extra cost. So we're going to lose those people from the service, and that would be a great shame. I have got a question regarding the vehicles. Can they be used for wheelie bins and, you know, to collect wheelie bins and bags? If so, I mean, that would be very reassuring to then know that we could give people the opportunity to have bags. And I would ask councillors, when they make their decision about this matter, to consider funding this appropriately for people to have this choice. Once the wheelie bins, if people get used to them and they like them, that's fine. But I know that not everybody will be able to accommodate them. They won't be able to, as you said, they won't be able to store them. But the street scene and the obstacles raised, it's just, some of these things are going to cause great problems. And as I said, especially on the safe routes to schools. So I realise you refer to subsidy, but it does come out of our taxpayers' money. So I would like the council to consider funding this so that we can give a good service, continue to give a good service, both bags and wheelie bins. And counting up, I've got 12 streets which have got terrace properties in. So we have a lot of terrace properties in my ward anyway, and I'm sure that's repeated throughout in areas throughout Monmouthshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhouse. Laura, would you like to just come back on whether the new refuge trucks would be able to collect both the bags and the wheelie bins? I'm sure if they can collect wheelie bins, they'll be able to collect bag waste, but can you just confirm?
Yes, so if the decision was to be made to move to fortnightly garden waste, we would be procuring specialist lifts for the backs of the vehicles, which aren't suitable for manual loading of reusable bags. Officers have talked about the option of providing a choice to residents. When we've looked at this, though, it means that we wouldn't be able to procure the specialist lifts. It means that we'd have to continue running the service with the tuck under bar lift vehicles we have now. And it means it would push our collection costs back up by a vehicle and a crew to back to where we are now, to the £660,000. By offering people with terraced houses with no front gardens bags, and by offering the people who can't manage wheelie bins bags, we believe we can offer small amounts of bags to these customers. We will either put on a separate round on a different vehicle without a lift, is what we're looking at probably doing, to overcome the issues, but I don't think we would be able to provide a choice. We wouldn't be able to have a mixture of both bins and bags for those reasons.
Can I just come back on that? So what would the cost be for the people who are having the sort of the bags rather than the wheelie bins that you know cannot manage the wheelie bins, that you eventually you decide that they could have the bags? What would the cost be for them?
So within the report, we're proposing the same cost, so whether you have a wheelie bin or the equivalent literage in bags. So if that's agreed at the £35, it would be £35 for either one bin or 3 bags fortnightly.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Disappointing, but I honestly do think it's going to cause a lot of problems, particularly in my ward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Woodhouse. Councillor Webb, I understand you want to come in.
Yes, just very quickly, thank you, Chairman. I was going to raise the same points as Councillor Woodhouse, actually, with regard to the vehicles, what they were capable of doing. I'm a bit concerned. It seems not a very good alternative. And how about the people that just want one bag, with a small garden, I'm a bit concerned about there's not an opportunity to have a choice. I really think that we should have that, our residents should be able to have that choice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Now, I don't think there's any more questions, so we'll move on. Just to sum up, really, obviously we've debated the ease of use of bag or wheelie bin, whichever is, for me, I think it's a personal preference. There are for and against. Whichever option we decide will depend on the type of vehicle we procure, which will collect both bags and wheelie bins, or will be different collections. A different vehicle, is that right? That's what you said, isn't it, Laura? A separate vehicle. Smaller 120 litre bins instead of a 240 bin can be used or looked or explored, but the collection charge would need to remain the same. When we do assessments for people who need assisted collections, for those who cannot manage wheelie bins at all, we can offer looking at bags. It will either be done over the phone or in person. Obviously, I'm sure it won't be in person whilst we're still under COVID guidance. Cleaning bins has been mentioned. Obviously, that's again personal opinion. Some will say it's a lot easier to clean out a plastic bin than the Hessian bags. Members have asked officers to reassure them that if people have steps or difficulty with access, they can have a bag instead, which might be difficult. But I'm just going to let Councillor Brown come in. I do apologise, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak as a visiting member. One of the issues that was raised by my residents was about uneven land, and you mentioned about having to empty a bag into the bin, and so that wasn't an issue. But in my ward, particularly in places like Minithback, there's very high slopes of the drives, and they're on a very high gradient, and I'm not quite sure how easy it will be to manoeuvre a wheelie bin or put them out for collection in those circumstances. And you have mentioned about the flexibility of the scheme in terms of storage and assisted collections and so forth, but I think it would be good if that was, if you are going to proceed with that, if that was formally included within the recommendations on it. So what I am suggesting is this idea of having flexibility in the garden waste collection system to allow for garden bag provision, with exceptions for elderly, infirm, those with uneven sloping and or topography of land issues, and storage issues. And I think the storage issues would also be in relation to the issue that has been mentioned for terraced houses. So I think it would be appropriate if that was to give residents and members reassurance, if that was actually stated as part of the recommendations. The other issue is with regard to the cost. I mean, the recommendation is basically 35 per bin, and I was just wondering, obviously there's a balance between the charges that you increase and the customers that you lose, and how, on a bulk basis, how cost effective this actually is. Because what I was thinking of in terms of, if you have 3 bags and it's £18 a bag for a week, that's 54 bags, and to have the equivalent on a fortnightly basis would mean, because there's 3 bags per bin, would mean that you'd then be paying £70 rather than £54, and I think a £30 per bin would be better, because the increase would be you know, for that amount would be a bit more similar, you know, bearing in mind sort of how you can, if you increase prices too much in one go, you can lose too many customers. The other thing is that you mentioned about uneven land and having to empty when you're doing weeding of gardens, having to empty your bag into the bin. I mean, I would like also to be the availability of the garden bags for people to purchase on a cost basis, on a small charge basis, so that they could, you know, when their old bags run out, there is the availability to actually purchase them at a reasonable price from the council if they actually need them. You know, I mean, at the moment the bags are provided free. I do remember at one stage a while back it was £1 a bag if you wanted one from, you know, to buy one from somewhere. So if there was a reasonable small charge, then I think that would be beneficial to people who go to the bin system and have to empty the garden refuge from where they've gathered it in the garden and then into the bins. So I think that ought to be considered as well. Thank you. But that's up to the committee what decision they make. But if they did go for the wheelie bin side, or if the cabinet did, then I would like those recommendations to be added, so that to give both residents and members that reassurance. And I think in relation to the Forest of Dean, it was only about 102 properties that they found had difficulties, but those people in those properties, you know, obviously do have concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Would you like to come back in, or obviously those were repeated? So
I can come in quickly.
Okay.
Talking about the allowing reusable bags for people who can't manage them or have no storage to keep a bin is quite easy to explain. When we get into the territory of people who have uneven land or long drives, it becomes extremely difficult to put into words, to agree or not agree, and I do feel we're getting almost into the territory that it would be probably undeliverable. We talked about the choice issue, and if we were to give people the choice and we had too many reusable bags, we probably wouldn't be able to manage them within our existing rounds, and then potentially looking at additional costs through crews and vehicles. It's just something to flag up.
Yeah, I think obviously if you do find, because this system hasn't been, sorry Chair, can I come back? This system hasn't been piloted, so you don't actually know how difficult on a practical basis it would be for people, and I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility, you know, so that you can, I mean, it sounds as if you've already got flexibility within the system in terms of assisted collections, which is fair enough, but obviously if somebody is struggling on a slope as a result, I mean, it could be that it comes under that assisted collection thing in any event, but I think there needs to be something on that and on storage as well, because I think the storage issue would also deal with the issues that Councillor Woodhouse has raised in relation to terraced houses, and there's got to be some flexibility in the system, because, you know, you found that from asking other authorities that they do have to have some flexibility within it, and I think if you've got that as part of a formal flexibility, then at least that does provide that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So I think it's safe to say that all members are looking for something a bit more flexible, especially for those that are less able to lift the or push the wheelie bins. They'd like the bags to remain in place, and obviously they've suggested that they'd also like an option for people regarding their landscape if they've got an incline to and from their property. But as you said, this could incur more charges. So so the committee will now consider the way forward. We have fully discussed the report's implications and taken into account the views of residents. We now need to consider the recommendations outlined in the report under 2.1, which are that we conduct pre-decision scrutiny, which we have done, and consider whether we agree these recommendations and whether we wish to make any further recommendations to Cabinet, which we have, and to confirm that any strong community select committee members can vote on these. So the vote will come up in the chat bar again, and obviously I just want to stress that this isn't a vote to make a decision. This is just to reflect the select committee's views.
Chair, if I may,
Yep.
happy to vote and crack on, but I did request, did we have the HR report, Ms Porter, cited? Can we see that? I mean, after the vote, fine, if they want to send that across to all members, and also have they done any of the work, which I also requested, on what they expect the drop off to be at the different percentages of the increase?
Can you give me a moment, Councillor Petrini?
Of course, Chair.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So I've just spoken to officers, and we'll ensure that that report goes out to all the members on the committee, and they will also get what they expect the drop-off will be with regards to the revised charge. Is that okay, Councillor Petrini?
Perfect, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so the first one will be to approve the change of frequency of collection of garden waste from weekly to fortnightly. It won't take long. So the voting bar is in your chat bar, members, so if you can submit your vote. Okay, thank you. And the next one, to approve the change of container from a 80 litre garden waste bag to a 240 litre wheeled bin. And the next one, to consider and approve the charge levied for the future services. Members can submit the vote, that would be wonderful. Okay. So thank you, members, and thank you, officers, for the time and efforts in bringing these reports to us. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to offer a huge thank you to the public for your patience. That, I will say personally, that was the most difficult meeting to chair on record so far. I'd like to obviously thank officers, and the councillors had difficult decisions to make, and elected members don't take these decisions lightly, but your contributions towards the select committee's debate assist the cabinet in making these decisions. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good evening and stay safe.
Thank you, Lisa.